Tonight, we embark upon a quiet journey through the complete life of Martin Luther King Jr. His name resonates through the annals of the 20th century, a figure whose presence profoundly altered the course of American history and inspired movements for justice across the globe. We will explore the intricate tapestry of his existence, tracing the threads of his development from childhood innocence to a leadership that moved nations. This narrative is crafted not for drama or spectacle, but for a calm, steady contemplation. Our purpose is to understand, to observe the progression of a life that became synonymous with a profound struggle for equality and human dignity. We will move chronologically, allowing each period of his life to unfold with measured pace, providing space for reflection on the events, the influences, and the decisions that shaped him. From his early days in Atlanta through his education and spiritual formation to the emergence of his powerful voice and his ultimate sacrifice, we will endeavour to present a historically grounded account. As you settle in, perhaps allowing the gentle rhythm of this story to guide you towards rest, consider the quiet power of a single life dedicated to a cause greater than itself. We invite you to simply listen, to absorb the details of this extraordinary journey, and to perhaps discover new facets of a story often told, but rarely explored with such a deliberate, tranquil focus. If this quiet exploration brings you a sense of calm, or aids in your journey to sleep, please consider sharing your location, liking or subscribing, allowing others to discover these peaceful narratives. Our journey into the life of Martin Luther King Jr. begins in Atlanta, Georgia, on a winter's day, January 15th, 1929. It was in this bustling southern city that he entered the world, given the name Michael King. His birth occurred within a stable and deeply religious household, a foundation that would profoundly shape his formative years and beyond. The family home, situated at 501 Auburn Avenue, was not merely a residence but a vibrant centre of community and faith. His father, Michael King Sr., was a prominent and respected figure in Atlanta. He served as the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, a cornerstone of the African American community, and was already an influential leader in his own right, advocating for civil rights and social justice. It was later, during a trip to Germany in 1934, that Michael King Sr. would be so inspired by the Protestant Reformation leader, Martin Luther, that he would change his own name, and subsequently his son's, to Martin Luther. His mother, Alberta Williams King, was the daughter of the Reverend Adam Daniel Williams, who had preceded her husband as pastor of Ebenezer. Alberta was a woman of quiet strength and gentle demeanour, a skilled musician who played the organ at the church. She provided a nurturing and intellectually stimulating environment for her children. Young Martin, or ML as he was often called, grew up alongside his older sister Christine and his younger brother Alfred Daniel. The King household was characterized by warmth, discipline, and a constant emphasis on faith, education, and service. This early environment, rooted deeply in the black church tradition, and offered a secure and loving beginning, even as the larger world outside its walls was marked by profound racial segregation and injustice. This secure foundation, however, would soon be contrasted by early encounters with the harsh realities of that segregated world. The rich tapestry of Martin Luther King Jr.'s upbringing was woven not only by his parents, but also by the profound legacy of his maternal grandfather, Adam Daniel Williams. This lineage of religious leadership and fervent community engagement was deeply embedded within the family, shaping the environment in which young Martin would grow. Adam Daniel Williams was a figure of considerable stature in Atlanta's African American community. Born in 1863, just as the Civil War was drawing to a close, yet he embodied the spirit of a generation striving for progress in the face of immense adversity. He became the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church in 1894, a position he held with distinction for over 3 decades, until his passing in 1931. Under his guidance, Ebenezer flourished, growing from a modest congregation into a powerful spiritual and social institution. More than just a spiritual leader, A.D. Williams was an early and vocal civil rights activist. He understood that faith and justice were inextricably linked. He was instrumental in establishing the Atlanta chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, in 1917, serving as its second president. Through this platform, he championed voting rights, advocated for better educational opportunities for black children, and actively challenged the pervasive segregation of the era. His sermons often extended beyond theological teachings, addressing the social and political struggles faced by his community. He organized boycotts against racially discriminatory newspapers and led efforts to increase black voter registration. His work laid crucial groundwork, demonstrating that the pulpit could be a powerful platform for social change. Though Martin Luther King Jr. was only a toddler when his grandfather passed away, the spirit of A.D. Williams's activism, his unwavering commitment to justice, and his powerful voice from the pulpit profoundly influenced the household. This deep-rooted tradition of leadership passed from grandfather to father and then to son. Would become a defining characteristic of the King family's enduring impact on American history. The foundation of Martin Luther King Jr.'s early world was further solidified by the imposing and principled presence of his father, Martin Luther King Sr., affectionately known as Daddy King. His father was a man of immense strength, independence, and an outspoken minister who provided a living example of courage and conviction for his young son. Born in 1897 in Stockbridge, Georgia, Martin Luther King Sr.'s early life was marked by hardship and limited opportunities. Yet, through sheer determination and an unyielding spirit, he overcame these obstacles, eventually making his way to Atlanta to pursue an education and a calling to ministry. He married Alberta Williams, the daughter of the esteemed Adam Daniel Williams, and in 1931 he succeeded his father-in-law as pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church. Under Daddy King's leadership, Ebenezer continued its growth as a spiritual and community hub. He was not merely a preacher of the gospel, he was a dynamic force within the community, actively engaged in its betterment. His sermons were often infused with a powerful message of self-respect and the imperative to challenge injustice. He believed firmly in the dignity of all people and was unafraid to articulate this belief, even when it meant confronting the deeply entrenched racial inequalities of the South. Daddy King's challenges to racial injustice were practical and direct. He led numerous voter registration drives, understanding that political power was essential for social change. He was among the first black leaders in Atlanta to demand equal pay for black teachers and actively campaigned against segregation in public transportation and schools. He famously refused to ride segregated city buses, choosing instead to drive his own car, a small but significant act of defiance that spoke volumes. On one occasion, when pulled over by a white police officer who addressed him disrespectfully, Daddy King firmly asserted his identity and demanded proper respect, refusing to be intimidated. These acts of quiet and not-so-quiet resistance provided a constant, tangible example for young Martin. He witnessed firsthand his father's unwavering commitment to justice, his refusal to bow to oppression, and his deep-seated belief in the power of faith to effect change. As this robust and courageous paternal figure instilled in his son an early understanding of what it meant to stand up for what was right, regardless of the personal cost. Young Martin Luther King Jr.'s formative years unfolded within the vibrant embrace of Atlanta's Sweet Auburn neighborhood. This historic district centered along Auburn Avenue, was far more than just a collection of streets and houses. It was a flourishing nexus of African American life, culture and enterprise, a sanctuary of strength carved out amidst the broader landscape of racial segregation. Sweet Auburn, during King's childhood, was a testament to black resilience and ingenuity. Despite the pervasive legal and social barriers imposed by Jim Crow laws, the community had built a self-sustaining ecosystem, and the avenue itself buzzed with activity. Black-owned businesses lined the thoroughfare, including banks, insurance companies, newspapers, restaurants, and theatres. Professional services thrived, with black doctors, lawyers, and dentists serving their community. It was a place where black entrepreneurs and professionals could achieve success and independence, creating a powerful sense of collective accomplishment. The cultural environment of Sweet Auburn was equally rich. Churches like Ebenezer Baptist stood as towering pillars of moral guidance and social organisation, their Sunday services filled with powerful sermons and uplifting music. Schools, though segregated, were committed to providing quality education, fostering intellect and aspiration. Social clubs and fraternal organisations offered spaces for fellowship, networking, and mutual support, weaving a dense tapestry of community bonds. For young Martin, growing up in Sweet Auburn meant being surrounded by positive role models and a strong sense of identity. He saw black people in positions of leadership and authority daily, not just within his own family but throughout his neighbourhood. He witnessed the dignity and pride with which his community navigated the challenges of segregation, transforming constraint into creativity and resilience. This environment, while undeniably shaped by racial injustice, was also a powerful incubator of hope, ambition, and a profound sense of belonging. It was a place where the seeds of his future leadership were quietly, yet firmly sown, providing him with a bedrock of community strength and cultural affirmation that would inform his life's work. Even within the supportive confines of Sweet Auburn, the harsh realities of segregation inevitably intruded upon young Martin Luther King Jr.'s world. These early encounters, subtle yet deeply impactful, began to chisel away at his innocent understanding of fairness and equality, planting the first seeds of his lifelong quest for justice. One of the most poignant of these early experiences involved a white playmate, a boy who lived across the street. For a time, their childhood was shared, a simple tapestry of games and laughter woven without regard for the arbitrary lines of race. However, as they grew older and approached school age, the invisible boundaries of segregation became starkly visible. The white boy's parents, adhering to the societal norms of the era, informed King that their son could no longer play with him. The sudden, inexplicable separation, rooted in nothing more than the colour of their skin, left a profound mark on the young King. He struggled to comprehend why a cherished friendship could be severed so abruptly, purely by external decree. Other instances, less personal but equally revealing, further illuminated the pervasive nature of racial discrimination. There were the daily reminders, the coloured-only signs on water fountains and restrooms, the segregated sections on buses, the denial of service at certain establishments. He observed how his parents and other black adults were often treated with disrespect or outright dismissal in places where white patrons were welcomed. These were not isolated incidents, but rather a constant systemic reinforcement of a social order that deemed black people inherently inferior. These early lessons in segregation, though painful, served a crucial purpose in King's development. They shattered the comfortable illusions of childhood and forced him to confront the stark injustice embedded within American society. He began to understand that the world outside Sweet Auburn operated by different rules that systematically disadvantaged people who looked like him. This nascent awareness of racial inequality, born from personal experience and observation, would gradually evolve into a burning conviction, setting him on a path to challenge and ultimately transform the very system that had once separated him from his childhood friend. Despite the pervasive shadow of segregation, Martin Luther King Jr.'s childhood was marked by a unique position within the black community. His family, anchored by the influential Ebenezer Baptist Church, enjoyed a degree of comfort and respect that was uncommon for African Americans in the Jim Crow South. They were not wealthy in the conventional sense, but they possessed a stable home, educational opportunities, and a prominent standing that afforded them certain protections and privileges. This relative advantage, however, didn't shield young King from the broader systemic racism that afflicted the vast majority of black Americans. This duality, a childhood of relative privilege within the black community, juxtaposed against the backdrop of widespread oppression, profoundly shaped King's early awareness of social stratification. He experienced firsthand the warmth and resilience of a thriving black community, and yet he also witnessed the constant struggle and indignities faced by those less fortunate. His family's home on Auburn Avenue, though comfortable, was still firmly within the boundaries of a segregated city. He observed that while his father could command respect within certain spheres, even Daddy King encountered the impenetrable walls of racial discrimination in the wider society. This unique vantage point allowed King to develop a nuanced understanding of injustice. He was not personally subjected to the most brutal forms of economic deprivation or direct physical violence that many black Americans endured. Yet, he was acutely aware of their existence. His family's position offered a buffer, but it also provided a clearer perspective on the arbitrary nature of the racial hierarchy. He saw that even success and influence within the black community could not entirely overcome the barriers imposed by white supremacy. This awareness fostered a sense of responsibility rather than complacency. The comfort of his upbringing did not breed indifference. Instead, it seemed to deepen his empathy for those who lacked such advantages. He understood that his family's standing was an exception, not the rule, and that the systemic nature of racism affected everyone, albeit in different ways. This early grasp of social stratification, born from his family's unique position, became a foundational element in his developing worldview, urging him towards a future dedicated to dismantling those very structures of inequality. The intellectual journey of Martin Luther King Jr. took a significant turn when, at the precocious age of 15, he enrolled in Morehouse College in 1944. This early entry was facilitated by a wartime program designed to admit promising high school students to address the shortage of young men on college campuses. Morehouse, a distinguished historically black men's institution, stood as a beacon of education and empowerment within the segregated South. It offered an environment where black intellect was not only nurtured but celebrated, free from the overt racial prejudices that permeated white academic settings of the era. Within the hallowed halls of Morehouse, King found himself immersed in a rich intellectual environment. The faculty, many of whom were black scholars of exceptional caliber, challenged students to think critically about society, philosophy, and their place in the world. Conversations extended beyond textbook learning, delving into the pressing social and political issues of the day, particularly those concerning racial justice and equality. This atmosphere provided a crucial space for King to explore complex ideas without the constant burden of external racial denigration. Despite his family's deep roots in the ministry, King initially harbored uncertainties about following directly in the footsteps of his father and grandfather. The path of a pastor, while esteemed, didn't immediately appeal to his intellectual curiosity or his nascent desire for a broader societal impact. He considered various professions, including law and medicine, reflecting a youthful desire for independence and a personal search for purpose. The ministry to him seemed too confined to the pulpit, perhaps lacking the intellectual rigour he craved, or the direct engagement with social change that was beginning to stir within him. Yet, even as he explored other avenues, the profound influence of his upbringing and the moral imperatives discussed at Morehouse continued to subtly guide him. The college, with its emphasis on service, leadership, and the upliftment of the race, unknowingly prepared him for a role he was not yet ready to fully embrace. It was a period of intellectual awakening, a time for questioning and exploration, setting the stage for the deeper revelations that would eventually lead him to his destiny. During his years at Morehouse College, a significant figure emerged who would profoundly influence the trajectory of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life, Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays. As the president of Morehouse, Mays was not merely an administrator. He was a towering intellectual, a seasoned theologian, and a passionate advocate for social justice. His presence at the college provided King with a mentor whose wisdom and unwavering commitment to equality left an indelible mark. Mays's philosophy of education extended far beyond the acquisition of knowledge. He firmly believed that education, particularly for Black Americans, carried a moral imperative. It was not enough to simply learn. One must also apply that learning to uplift humanity and challenge injustice. He frequently articulated the idea that true education fostered critical thinking, ethical leadership, and a deep sense of responsibility to one's community and to the world at large. These were not abstract concepts for Mays, they were principles to be lived and acted upon. He also held a profound conviction regarding the role of the Black church. For Mays, the church was more than a place of worship. It was a central institution for social change, a sanctuary for the oppressed, and a powerful voice for justice. He saw the ministry as a calling that demanded not only spiritual guidance, but also courageous engagement with the temporal struggles of society. This perspective provided a powerful counterpoint to King's earlier reservations about the ministry, suggesting a path where faith and activism could converge. Mays's sermons and speeches, delivered with a quiet authority and deep conviction, often addressed the systemic nature of racism and the moral obligation to resist it. He spoke of the inherent dignity of every individual, a concept that resonated deeply with King, one who had himself experienced the indignities of segregation. The president's consistent message that Black individuals possessed the capacity for greatness and had a duty to strive for it provided a powerful affirmation and a call to action for the young King. Through Mays, King began to envision a ministry that was not confined to the spiritual realm, but was actively engaged in the struggle for a more just world. This mentorship planted crucial seeds, nurturing the nascent social consciousness within King and preparing him for the leadership role he would eventually embrace. Despite his initial hesitation about following the well-trodden path of his father and grandfather into the pulpit, Martin Luther King Jr.'s time at Morehouse College, particularly under the guidance of Benjamin Mays, gradually clarified his sense of purpose. The deep-seated family legacy of pastoral leadership, coupled with Mays' compelling vision of the ministry as a powerful force for social good, began to reshape King's perspectives. He started to see the church not merely as a family tradition to uphold, but as an institution uniquely positioned to address the profound injustices he witnessed daily. The intellectual rigour of Morehouse, combined with the moral arguments presented by Mays, helped King reconcile his academic aspirations with his spiritual inclinations. He found that the ministry, as Mays defined it, offered a platform for both intellectual engagement and practical action in the pursuit of justice. It became increasingly clear to him that his gifts for public speaking, his empathetic nature, and his growing understanding of social dynamics could be powerfully channeled through a life of spiritual service. This realization marked a pivotal turning point, transforming his earlier reluctance into a firm and deeply personal commitment. In 1948, At the relatively young age of 19, Martin Luther King Jr. made the formal decision to enter the ministry. This was not a sudden impulse, but rather the culmination of years of observation, reflection, and intellectual wrestling. He understood the gravity of the calling, aware of the expectations placed upon him by his prominent family and community. On February 25, 1948, he was ordained as a Baptist minister at Ebenezer Baptist Church, the very church where his father and grandfather had served. This ordination was more than a ceremonial rite, yet it signified his formal acceptance of a spiritual path that would define his entire adult life. He became an assistant pastor at Ebenezer, working alongside his father, a role that allowed him to gain practical experience in church leadership and pastoral care. These initial steps into the ministry were foundational, providing him with a practical grounding in sermon delivery, congregational relations, and community engagement that would prove invaluable in his future endeavours. He was now officially a man of the cloth, embarking on a journey that would intertwine his spiritual convictions with the destiny of a nation. Having formally committed to the ministry, Martin Luther King Jr. sought to deepen his theological and philosophical understanding. In the autumn of 1948, he moved north to Chester, Pennsylvania, to begin his graduate studies at Crozer Theological Seminary. This transition marked another significant step in his intellectual journey, placing him in an environment distinctly different from his upbringing in the segregated South. Crozer Seminary was a predominantly white institution, offering a curriculum rooted in liberal theology. Here, King was exposed to a much broader spectrum of religious thought and philosophical inquiry than he had encountered previously. The academic atmosphere was rigorous, demanding critical engagement with complex ideas and challenging long-held assumptions. He immersed himself in the study of biblical criticism, systematic theology, and the history of religions. This period at Crozer was characterized by an intellectual awakening. King encountered the writings of prominent theologians and philosophers, thus including Walter Rauschenbusch, whose social gospel resonated deeply with his burgeoning commitment to social justice. He also delved into the works of personalist philosophers like Edgar Sheffield Brightman and Borden Parker Bone, whose emphasis on the dignity and inherent value of every individual would profoundly influence his ethical framework. These thinkers provided him with sophisticated tools for analysing societal problems and envisioning solutions rooted in spiritual and moral principles. Crucially, Crozer offered a more integrated environment. Although still facing subtle forms of racial prejudice, King experienced a degree of interracial interaction and academic equality that was largely absent in his earlier life. This exposure to a diverse faculty and student body further broadened his perspective, encouraging him to think beyond the confines of his immediate experiences. He excelled academically, demonstrating a remarkable capacity for synthesis and critical thought, and graduated as valedictorian in 1951. His time at Crozer solidified his intellectual foundation, preparing him for the complex challenges that lay ahead in his ministry and activism. At Crozer Theological Seminary, Martin Luther King Jr.'s intellectual horizons expanded considerably, particularly through his deep engagement with liberal theology and the social gospel movement. These academic currents provided a robust framework for understanding Christianity's role in addressing societal ills, moving beyond a purely individualistic interpretation of faith. He was particularly influenced by the writings of Walter Rauschenbusch, then a leading proponent of the social gospel. Rauschenbusch's critique of industrial capitalism and his call for a Christianity that actively sought to transform social structures resonated profoundly with King. Rauschenbusch argued that the kingdom of God was not merely a future hope, but a present reality to be realized through social justice and ethical action. This perspective broadened King's understanding of sin, extending it beyond individual transgressions to encompass systemic injustices such as poverty, racism, and war. He began to see that true Christian faith demanded a commitment to dismantling these oppressive systems. Beyond Rauschenbusch, King explored other facets of liberal theology, which encouraged a critical and rational approach to scripture and doctrine. This intellectual environment fostered an understanding of God as a force for love and justice, rather than a punitive deity. It emphasized the inherent worth and dignity of every human being, regardless of race or social standing. Such theological grounding provided a powerful spiritual rationale for the nascent civil rights movement, offering a vision of a beloved community built on principles of equality and compassion. This period was not merely about absorbing information. It was a process of internalizing a worldview that united his spiritual convictions with a profound sense of social responsibility. The teachings at Crozer helped King articulate a theology that saw no separation between personal salvation and social redemption. He began to forge the intellectual connections that would later underpin his nonviolent direct action campaigns, viewing them as practical expressions of a deeply held Christian commitment to justice for all. The seminary experience thus laid crucial groundwork for his future leadership, providing him with a sophisticated theological lens through which to interpret and confront the world's injustices. During his time at Crozer, a pivotal intellectual encounter occurred for Martin Luther King Jr., his introduction to the philosophy and methods of Mahatma Gandhi. This was not a sudden revelation, but a gradual absorption of ideas that would profoundly shape his future approach to social change. King had heard of Gandhi before, but it was at Crozer that he began a deeper, more systematic study of Gandhi's life and work, particularly his principles of nonviolent civil disobedience, known as satyagraha. He read extensively about Gandhi's campaigns in India, examining how nonviolent resistance had been successfully employed against British colonial rule. Initially, King approached Gandhi's philosophy from an academic perspective, analysing it as an intriguing theory of social action. The concept of resisting injustice without resorting to violence, of meeting physical aggression with moral force, presented a compelling alternative to the prevailing strategies for addressing racial oppression in America. Gandhi's insistence on love as an active, transformative power, even towards oppressors, resonated with King's Christian theological background, which emphasized agape and unconditional love, R.A. Gross. He began to see a profound connection between Gandhi's political methods and the ethical teachings of Jesus, particularly the Sermon on the Mount. This intellectual bridge was crucial, as it allowed King to reconcile his spiritual convictions with a pragmatic strategy for social reform. While the full implications of nonviolence as a practical methodology for the American civil rights movement were still somewhat abstract for King at this stage, the seeds were firmly planted. He recognized in Gandhi's work a powerful, yet often overlooked tool for achieving justice. The idea that moral courage, disciplined non-cooperation, and a willingness to suffer without retaliation could disarm an unjust system began to solidify in his mind. This intellectual encounter with Gandhi's principles provided a vital complement to his theological studies, offering a concrete ethical path for applying his burgeoning commitment to social justice in the real world. Following his enriching experience at Crozer, Martin Luther King Jr. continued his academic journey, enrolling in the doctoral program in systematic theology at Boston University in 1951. This move represented a further deepening of his intellectual pursuits, aiming to refine his theological and philosophical understanding to an even greater degree. Boston University offered a robust academic environment, attracting scholars from various theological traditions, which provided King with a diverse intellectual landscape. His doctoral studies were characterized by an intensive engagement with major philosophical and theological thinkers. He delved into the works of personalists like Edgar Sheffield Brightman and Borden Parker Bowen, whose philosophy emphasized the personhood of God and the inherent worth and dignity of every individual. This personalist framework provided a philosophical underpinning for his belief in human equality and justice, reinforcing the moral imperative to challenge systems that dehumanized individuals. King's research at Boston University also involved a critical examination of other prominent philosophical schools, including realism and idealism, as well as the theological perspectives of thinkers like Paul Tillich and Reinhold Niebuhr. He sought to synthesize these diverse intellectual currents into a cohesive theological framework that could effectively address the complex social and ethical issues of his time. His dissertation, a comparison of the conceptions of God in the thinking of Paul Tillich and Henry Nelson Wieman, exemplified his rigorous academic approach, demonstrating his ability to engage deeply with complex theological ideas and articulate his own informed perspectives. This period in Boston was not merely about accumulating knowledge, it was about the profound integration of ideas. King was actively constructing the intellectual and moral foundations that would later inform his leadership in the civil rights movement. The doctoral program allowed him to sharpen his analytical skills, articulate his theological convictions with greater precision, and further cement his commitment to a faith-based activism rooted in rigorous thought and unwavering moral principle. It was a time of quiet yet intensive preparation, laying the groundwork for the monumental work that lay ahead. Amidst his rigorous academic pursuits at Boston University, Martin Luther King Jr.'s life took a significant personal turn. It was in Boston that he met Coretta Scott, a young woman from Marion, Alabama, who was then studying at the New England Conservatory of Music. Coretta possessed a remarkable talent for singing and a deep passion for social justice, qualities that immediately drew King's attention. Their initial meeting was arranged by a mutual friend, and from that first encounter a strong connection began to form. Coretta was not only a gifted musician with aspirations of a career in opera, she was also a thoughtful and principled individual, already engaged with issues of peace and equality. Her intellectual depth and unwavering commitment to a more just world resonated deeply with King, who recognized in her a kindred spirit. Their courtship unfolded amidst the backdrop of their demanding academic schedules and shared ideals. King was captivated by Coretta's intelligence, her dignified demeanor, and her independent spirit. She, in turn, was drawn to his earnestness, his intellectual vigor, and his profound sense of purpose. Their conversations often extended beyond personal affections, touching upon philosophy, theology, and the pressing social challenges facing their community and the nation. Coretta Scott brought to their burgeoning relationship a steadfast resolve and an awareness of the struggles faced by African Americans in the South. Having grown up in a segregated society, she understood the systemic injustices that King was preparing to confront. Her own experiences and aspirations aligned seamlessly with his burgeoning vision for social change. Their bond grew steadily, built upon mutual respect, shared values, and a common dedication to a life of service. The beginning of their partnership was more than a personal union. It was the formation of a powerful alliance. Coretta Scott would become not only his wife, but also a crucial partner in the monumental work that would define Martin Luther King Jr.'s life, offering unwavering support, insightful counsel, and a strong voice of her own in the pursuit of civil rights. The personal and intellectual connection forged between Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott culminated in their marriage on June 18, 1953. The ceremony took place on the lawn of Coretta's family home in Marion, Alabama, officiated by King's father, a quiet union that marked the beginning of a profound partnership. This marriage was not merely a joining of two individuals, it was the deliberate formation of a unit deeply committed to a shared vision of justice and equality. Following their wedding, Coretta Scott King embraced her role as a supportive spouse while simultaneously nurturing her own convictions and aspirations. Though she initially set aside her operatic dreams to support her husband's burgeoning ministry and activism, her commitment to social justice remained unwavering. She was not a passive observer, but an active participant, offering counsel, strength, and a steady presence in a life that would soon become extraordinarily demanding. Their family began to grow with the birth of their children. Yolanda in 1955, Martin Luther King III in 1957, Dexter Scott in 1961, and Bernice Albertine in 1963. The creation of their family unit provided a grounding force amidst the escalating pressures of public life. Coretta meticulously managed their household, creating an environment of stability and love, which was essential for King as he embarked on increasingly challenging leadership roles. Coretta's role extended far beyond domestic support. She became an activist in her own right, using her platform to speak out against injustice, advocate for peace, and champion women's rights. Her background in music and her eloquent public speaking skills allowed her to articulate the movement's goals and to rally support. She organized and participated in freedom concerts, using her artistic talents to raise funds and morale for the cause. The partnership between Martin and Coretta was foundational to his ability to lead the civil rights movement. She provided not only emotional and intellectual sustenance, but also a clear moral compass, often reminding him of the broader implications of their work. Her strength and resilience were crucial, especially during times of immense stress, threats, and personal sacrifice. Their marriage was a testament to a shared purpose, a steadfast commitment to nonviolence, and an enduring hope for a more equitable world. Through his years of rigorous academic pursuit, Martin Luther King Jr. meticulously wove together a tapestry of ideas, forming the intellectual bedrock of his activism. His foundational education at Morehouse College, under the mentorship of Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays, instilled in him a profound sense of social consciousness and the imperative for educated leadership within the black community. This early influence emphasized the practical application of faith to societal problems. At Crozer Theological Seminary, King delved into profound theological questions, grappling with the complexities of evil and injustice. It was here that he was first introduced to the philosophical teachings of Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi's concept of satyagraha, or truth force, which advocated for nonviolent civil disobedience, resonated deeply with King's Christian upbringing and his understanding of the teachings of Jesus. He saw in Gandhi's methods a powerful, ethical, and effective means to confront oppression without resorting to violence, a path that aligned with his theological convictions regarding love and reconciliation. His doctoral studies in systematic theology at Boston University further refined this intellectual synthesis. King engaged with the works of personalist philosophers who emphasized the inherent dignity and worth of every individual. This philosophical tradition provided a robust intellectual framework for his belief in the interconnectedness of humanity and the moral imperative to challenge systems that dehumanized any person. He also explored the writings of social gospel theologians who argued for the Church's responsibility to address social injustices, moving beyond individual salvation to collective liberation. The convergence of these diverse intellectual streams, the prophetic tradition of the Black Church, the rigorous ethical philosophy of Gandhi, and the personalist emphasis on human dignity rooted in Christian theology, formed King's unique philosophy of nonviolent resistance. He integrated Gandhi's practical methods with the Christian doctrine of agape love, a selfless, unconditional love that seeks the good of all, even one's adversaries. For King, non-violence was not merely a tactic of convenience. It was a deeply moral and spiritual commitment, a way of life rooted in the belief that love possessed the ultimate power to transform individuals and societies. This carefully constructed philosophy, a blend of intellectual rigor and spiritual conviction, would soon be tested and forged in the crucible of the American civil rights movement. With his doctoral studies completed and his intellectual framework firmly established, and the time arrived for Martin Luther King Jr. to embark upon his ministerial career. In 1954, he accepted the call to serve as pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. This decision marked a significant turning point, moving him from the academic halls of Boston to the heart of the American South, a region deeply entrenched in racial segregation and inequality. Dexter Avenue Baptist Church was not merely a place of worship. It was a prominent institution within Montgomery's black community, known for its educated and politically aware congregation. Situated close to the Alabama state capitol, the church held a symbolic position, standing as a beacon of hope and a gathering place for those who sought change. Its members included many professionals and educators, and individuals who were keenly aware of the injustices surrounding them and who possessed a quiet determination for progress. The community of Montgomery itself was a microcosm of the segregated South. Racial divisions permeated every aspect of life, from public transportation to educational institutions. While the city maintained a veneer of Southern gentility, beneath it lay the rigid structure of Jim Crow laws enforced by custom and intimidation. Black citizens faced daily indignities and systemic disenfranchisement. King's arrival in Montgomery brought with it a fresh perspective and a refined theological understanding of social justice. He was a young, articulate, and highly educated minister, traits that immediately distinguished him. His sermons at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church began to articulate his vision for a more just society, drawing upon his synthesis of Christian love and nonviolent resistance. He encouraged his congregation not only to find spiritual solace, but also to recognize their collective power to effect change. This new beginning in Montgomery, at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, quietly set the stage for the unforeseen challenges and transformative leadership that would soon emerge. As 1955 unfolded in Montgomery, Alabama, the atmosphere was thick with a palpable tension, a stillness before a storm. The city embodied the stark realities of the American South's racial landscape. Segregation was not merely a set of laws but an ingrained way of life, dictating where one could live, work, eat, and even sit. Public transportation, particularly the city buses, served as a daily humiliating reminder of this deeply entrenched system. The black citizens were relegated to the back of the bus, often forced to stand even when seats in the white section remained empty, and sometimes ordered to give up their seats to white passengers. This rigid social order was maintained through both official policy and unofficial intimidation. The racial hierarchy was clear and unyielding, designed to uphold white supremacy and to suppress any challenge to the status quo. For decades, efforts to dismantle these systems had met with fierce resistance, often resulting in violence and further oppression. However, the national landscape had begun to shift, albeit slowly. A year prior, in May of 1954, the United States Supreme Court had delivered its landmark decision in Brown v. Board of Education. This ruling declared state-sponsored segregation in public schools unconstitutional and overturning the separate but equal doctrine established by Plessy v. Ferguson. While Brown specifically addressed schools, its implications resonated far beyond the classroom. For many African Americans, it ignited a flicker of hope, suggesting that perhaps change was not only possible but legally mandated. Yet, this hope was met with equally fervent resistance in the South. White segregationists viewed the Brown decision as an infringement on states' rights and a direct assault on their way of life. The ruling fueled a determination to resist integration at all costs, leading to increased racial animosity and a hardening of positions. In Montgomery, this combination of long-standing injustice, nascent hope, and entrenched resistance created a volatile environment. The stage was thus set for events that would soon propel the city, and a young pastor, onto the national stage. On a chilly Thursday evening, December 1st, 1955 in Montgomery, Alabama, a seamstress named Rosa Parks boarded a city bus after a long day's work. She found a seat in the first row of the colored section, the area designated for black passengers. As the bus continued its route, more white passengers boarded, and soon all seats in the white section were occupied. The bus driver, James F. Blake, then demanded that 4 black passengers, including Mrs. Parks, give up their seats to make room for a white man. 3 of the passengers complied, moving to the already crowded rear of the bus. However, Rosa Parks remained seated. Her refusal was not a spur-of-the-moment decision born of weariness, but rather a quiet act of defiance rooted in a long history of activism and a deep conviction that the segregated system was unjust. She'd been active in the NAACP for years, serving as secretary of the local chapter, and had attended workshops on civil disobedience. Her act was deliberate, a stand against the daily indignities faced by black citizens. When the driver threatened her with arrest, Mrs. Parks calmly stated, "You may do that." She was subsequently arrested, charged with violating a local ordinance on segregation, and taken to the city jail. News of Rosa Parks' arrest spread quickly through Montgomery's black community. E.D. Nixon, a prominent NAACP leader, and Joanne Robinson, head of the Women's Political Council, WPC, immediately recognized the potential for this incident to serve as a catalyst for organized action. And the WPC, an organization of black professional women, had long been planning a bus boycott to protest the city's discriminatory practices. They had been waiting for the right moment, for a case that could galvanize widespread support. Rosa Parks, a respected and dignified figure, provided that opportunity. Working through the night, members of the WPC, led by Joanne Robinson, mimeographed thousands of flyers calling for a one-day bus boycott on Monday, December the 5th, the day of Mrs. Parks's trial. These flyers were distributed throughout the black community, in churches, schools and workplaces. The call was simple. Don't ride the bus to work, to town, to school or anywhere on Monday, December 5th. The spontaneous decision to organize this boycott marked the beginning of a profound chapter in the fight for civil rights. As the December 5th bus boycott commenced with overwhelming success, demonstrating the community's unity and resolve, a critical need arose for a formal organization to sustain and direct the burgeoning movement. On the afternoon of that same Monday, black leaders and ministers gathered at the Mount Zion AME Church to establish such an entity. The atmosphere was one of urgency and a shared sense of purpose, yet also marked by the practical challenge of leadership. The newly formed organization needed a name, and after some discussion, the Montgomery Improvement Association, or MIA, was chosen. Its objective was clear: to oversee and coordinate the boycott's efforts, ensuring its continuation until demands for fair treatment on city buses were met. The next crucial decision was the selection of a president. Several prominent and seasoned figures were present, individuals with long histories of activism and community leadership. However, a younger, less established minister was unexpectedly nominated: Martin Luther King Jr. He had been in Montgomery for only a little over a year, and while he was respected for his intellect and oratorical skills, he was not yet the most obvious choice for such a demanding role. The nomination was likely a strategic one, aiming to select a leader who was not deeply entrenched in existing factions or rivalries within the black community. His relative newness to Montgomery meant he carried fewer pre-existing political burdens. King himself felt a deep sense of trepidation. He was only 26 years old, with a young family, and had never before led a movement of this scale. The prospect of guiding a citywide protest against entrenched racial segregation was daunting. He initially expressed reluctance, citing his inexperience and the immense responsibility involved. Yet, the consensus among the assembled leaders was strong. They saw in him a potential for inspiring leadership, a fresh voice, and a commitment to justice that transcended personal ambition. After a brief period of reflection, King accepted the nomination. This moment marked a pivotal turning point, not only for the Montgomery bus boycott, but for Martin Luther King Jr.'s own trajectory. He stepped into a role he had not sought, propelled by the collective will of his community and the unfolding events of history. His acceptance meant that the young pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church was now at the forefront of a major civil rights struggle, a position that would forever alter the course of his life. With the Montgomery Improvement Association now established and Martin Luther King Jr. at its helm, the practicalities of sustaining a mass boycott became paramount. The vast majority of black residents who formed the backbone of the bus company's ridership had to find alternative ways to navigate the city. This challenge was met with an extraordinary display of ingenuity, cooperation, and sheer endurance. Central to the boycott strategy was the organised carpool system. Hundreds of private vehicles owned by community members were pressed into service, operating like a sophisticated informal taxi network. Volunteers drove circuits from early morning until late at night, picking up and dropping off boycotters at designated points across the city. Churches served as dispatch centres, coordinating routes and schedules, ensuring that workers could reach their jobs and children could attend school. This intricate system was a testament to meticulous planning and selfless dedication. Beyond the carpools, walking became a primary mode of transportation for thousands. People walked miles each day in all weather conditions, sometimes in their finest clothes for work or church. The sight of long lines of individuals walking purposefully along Montgomery streets became a powerful symbol of their resolve. The collective act of walking, though physically demanding, fostered a profound sense of shared purpose and solidarity. It was a visible manifestation of their sacrifice for a greater cause. The spirit of the boycott was further sustained by regular mass meetings held in churches throughout the week. These gatherings were more than just organisational updates. They were spiritual revivals, infused with hymns, prayers, and powerful speeches. It was in these meetings that the philosophy of nonviolence, championed by King and the MYA, was continually reinforced. Despite the hardships, the harassment, and the economic pressures exerted by the white establishment, the commitment to peaceful protest remained unwavering. This unwavering commitment was crucial, as the boycott was not without immense personal cost. Many participants faced threats, job losses, and outright violence. Yet, the collective spirit, fueled by faith and a deep yearning for justice, provided the strength to persevere. The Montgomery bus boycott thus became a living testament to the power of community solidarity and the enduring spirit of non-violent resistance in the face of systemic oppression. The prolonged success of the Montgomery bus boycott did not go unchallenged. Instead, it provoked intense and often violent opposition from those determined to maintain the segregated status quo. The white power structure in Montgomery employed various tactics to undermine the movement and intimidate its leaders and participants. Legal harassment was a common strategy. Boycott participants were frequently stopped by police, sometimes on fabricated charges, and issued citations. Drivers in the carpool system faced fines for minor traffic infractions, or even for operating what authorities deemed an unlicensed taxi service. Martin Luther King Jr. himself was arrested for speeding, a charge widely seen as a pretext to disrupt his leadership. These arrests, though often minor, served to create an atmosphere of fear and inconvenience, aiming to wear down the resolve of the boycotters. Beyond legal manoeuvres, the opposition escalated to more direct forms of harassment and violence. Threats, both anonymous and overt, became commonplace. Boycotters received menacing phone calls and hate mail. Homes of prominent civil rights leaders, including King's own residents, became targets. On January 30th, 1956, a bomb exploded on King's porch, while Coretta Scott King and their infant daughter Yolanda were inside. Miraculously, they were unharmed. Just days later, the home of E.D. Nixon, another key boycott leader, was also bombed. These acts of domestic terrorism were designed to instill terror and break the spirit of the movement. The bombing of his home was a profoundly personal and terrifying experience for King. Yet, in the face of such extreme danger, his commitment to non-violence only deepened. When a crowd gathered outside his damaged house, enraged and ready for retaliation, King emerged to address them. He urged calm, reminding them of their Christian principles and their commitment to love and non-violence, even in the face of hatred. His composure and steadfastness in that moment were remarkable, demonstrating a profound personal courage that would define his leadership. The constant threat of violence, the bombings, and the daily harassment placed an immense burden on King and his family. However, these challenges, rather than stifling the movement, often served to galvanize the community further, strengthening their resolve and highlighting the moral righteousness of their cause. While the people of Montgomery walked and endured daily hardship, a parallel and equally vital battle was being waged in the nation's courts. The Montgomery Improvement Association understood that sustained direct action needed to be reinforced by legal challenges to dismantle the segregation ordinances. In February 1956, attorneys Fred Gray, Charles D. Langford, and Arthur Shawes filed a federal lawsuit, Browder v. Gale, on behalf of 4 African-American women, Aurelia Browder, Susie McDonald, Janetta Reese, and Mary Louise Smith. They challenged the constitutionality of bus segregation in Montgomery and throughout Alabama. The legal strategy was clear: to directly attack the separate but equal doctrine, which had been upheld in the infamous Plessy v. Ferguson Supreme Court decision of 1896, as it applied to public transportation. The plaintiffs argued that segregated buses violated the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, which guarantees equal protection under the law for all citizens. On June 5, 1956, a 3-judge panel of the U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Alabama ruled in favor of the plaintiffs in Browder v. Gale. The court declared that bus segregation was unconstitutional, directly citing the Supreme Court's landmark 1954 ruling in Brown v. Board of Education, which had outlawed segregation in public schools. The judges asserted that the separate but equal doctrine can no longer be constitutionally applied to public transportation. This was a profound legal victory, confirming the inherent injustice of segregation. However, the city of Montgomery and the state of Alabama swiftly appealed this decision to the United States Supreme Court, delaying its implementation. The boycott therefore continued, demonstrating the community's unwavering commitment even after a favorable court ruling. The people understood that legal pronouncements often required continued pressure to be fully realized. Finally, on November 13, 1956, the Supreme Court of the United States affirmed the District Court's ruling in Browder v. Gale. This decision, though brief, was unequivocal. Bus segregation was unconstitutional. The highest court in the land had spoken, providing the legal foundation for the desegregation of Montgomery's buses. This judicial triumph marked a pivotal moment, not just for Montgomery, but for the entire civil rights movement, affirming that nonviolent direct action, when coupled with strategic legal challenges, could indeed dismantle the deeply entrenched system of Jim Crow. The legal path to equality, though long, had found a significant early victory. The success in Montgomery, culminating in the Supreme Court's declaration against bus segregation, illuminated the power of organized nonviolent resistance. It also revealed a critical need for a broader, more coordinated effort to challenge segregation beyond a single city. Local movements, while powerful, often lack the resources and unified strategy to effect widespread change across the American South. Recognizing this, a group of influential African American ministers and civil rights leaders, many of whom had been instrumental in the Montgomery bus boycott, convened in Atlanta in January 1957. Their aim was to establish an organization that could expand the tactics of nonviolent direct action and moral persuasion to confront racial injustice throughout the region. Out of these discussions emerged the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SCLC. Martin Luther King Jr., whose leadership during the Montgomery boycott had brought him national prominence, was a natural choice for the organization's first president. His oratorical skills, his deep commitment to Christian principles, and his articulate advocacy for nonviolence made him a compelling figure to lead this new body. The SCLC was explicitly designed to be a coordinating agency, not a membership organization, working to support and empower local movements rather than supplant them. Its primary purpose was to harness the moral authority and organizing power of black churches, which served as vital community hubs and centers of resistance. The CLC sought to train local leaders in the philosophy and tactics of nonviolent protest, drawing inspiration from Mahatma Gandhi's successful campaigns in India. It aimed to conduct voter registration drives, educational programs, and direct action campaigns against all forms of segregation and discrimination. The formation of the SCLC marked a significant evolution in the civil rights movement. It provided a structured interstate framework for the struggle, allowing for the sharing of strategies, resources, and experiences. Under King's leadership, the SCLC would become a central force in the coming years, orchestrating many of the most impactful campaigns that would ultimately challenge and dismantle the legal structures of segregation in the South. It was an expansion of the movement, moving from localized triumphs to a coordinated regional assault on injustice. With its foundation laid, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference embarked upon its initial endeavors to challenge segregation. One of the SCLC's earliest and most enduring efforts was the Crusade for Citizenship, launched in 1958. This initiative aimed to increase the number of registered black voters across the South, understanding that political power was a fundamental component of true equality. The SCLC sought to educate potential voters about their rights and to overcome the myriad discriminatory practices, such as poll taxes, literacy tests, and outright intimidation that disenfranchised African Americans. Beyond voter registration, the SCLC also began to support local desegregation campaigns in various southern cities. These early attempts often met with significant resistance, highlighting the deeply entrenched nature of Jim Crow laws and customs. Unlike the singular focus of the Montgomery bus boycott, which had a clear target and a relatively unified black community, these broader desegregation efforts sometimes encountered more fractured local leadership or less prepared communities. In cities like Birmingham, Alabama, and Albany, Georgia, initial SCLC campaigns faced formidable opposition from white authorities, who often employed both legal maneuvers and overt force to maintain the racial status quo. The SCLC's strategy of nonviolent direct action, while morally powerful, required a sustained commitment from participants and a willingness to endure arrest and violence. The organisation itself was still in its formative years, building its infrastructure and refining its approach. Expanding the movement across diverse communities presented unique challenges. Each city had its own specific power structures, its own history of racial relations, and its own internal dynamics within the black community. What worked effectively in one locale might not translate seamlessly to another. The SCLC had to learn to adapt its strategies, to build trust with local leaders, and to navigate the complexities of a deeply segregated society. These early campaigns, though not always resulting in immediate sweeping victories, were crucial learning experiences, shaping the SCLC's future tactics and its understanding of the long struggle ahead. They were foundational steps in a much larger journey toward freedom. As the 1960s dawned, a new wave of activism began to ripple across the South, driven by a younger generation. On February 1st, 1960, 4 black college students in Greensboro, North Carolina, sat down at a segregated Woolworth's lunch counter, politely requesting service. Their simple act of defiance ignited a spontaneous and widespread movement. Within weeks, sit-ins spread to dozens of cities in multiple states, primarily led by students who were tired of the slow pace of change. These young activists, often inspired by the non-violent principles espoused by Martin Luther King Jr., and the SCLC, brought a renewed sense of urgency and direct action to the civil rights movement. Their willingness to face arrest, harassment, and violence without retaliation captured national attention, exposing the stark realities of segregation to a broader audience. The sit-ins targeted public accommodations such as lunch counters, department stores, and libraries, demanding equal access for all citizens. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference quickly recognized the profound energy and potential of this student-led movement. While the SCLC had been primarily composed of ministers and older community leaders, King understood the vital role these young people could play. He offered words of encouragement and solidarity, lending the SCLC's moral authority and organizational experience to support the burgeoning student efforts. Despite this support, a subtle generational difference sometimes existed. The younger activists, while respecting King, often preferred a more decentralized and immediate approach to protest, less constrained by the cautious planning that sometimes characterized the SCLC's campaigns. This dynamic led to the formation of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, in April 1960, which would become a significant force in its own right. King, however, saw the immense value in their courage and commitment, viewing their actions as a powerful complement to the SCLC's ongoing work. The sit-ins invigorated the struggle, bringing new faces and fresh tactics to the forefront of the fight for civil rights. In 1961, building upon the momentum of the sit-in movement, civil rights activists conceived a bold new strategy, the Freedom Rides. Organized primarily by the Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE, and later joined by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, these rides aimed to challenge segregation on interstate buses and in bus terminals across the Deep South. The Supreme Court had already ruled against segregated interstate travel in cases like Morgan v. Virginia in 1946 and Boynton v. Virginia in 1960. But these decisions were largely ignored in many southern states. The Freedom Riders sought to test the federal government's willingness to enforce its own laws. On May 4, 1961, the first group of Freedom Riders, consisting of both black and white volunteers, departed Washington, D.C. on 2 buses, and their journey was intended to draw attention to the persistent defiance of federal mandates. As they travelled deeper into the South, the riders encountered increasing hostility. In Anniston, Alabama, one bus was firebombed and its passengers were attacked by a white mob. In Birmingham, riders were brutally beaten by Klansmen with the complicity of local police. These violent assaults, captured by news cameras, sent shockwaves across the nation and around the world. Despite the extreme danger, the freedom rides continued, with new groups of students and activists stepping forward to replace those who'd been injured or arrested. Martin Luther King Jr. and the SCLC offered their unwavering support to the riders, though King himself did not participate directly in the rides, a decision that sometimes caused tension with the younger, yet more confrontational activists. He instead played a crucial role in rallying national support, advocating for federal intervention, and providing moral leadership during this perilous period. The violence reached a peak in Montgomery, Alabama, where a mob attacked riders at the bus terminal, leading to a large-scale confrontation. King travelled to Montgomery, where he preached at a besieged church, surrounded by an angry mob, and appealed for federal protection. The events of the Freedom Rides ultimately compelled the Kennedy administration to act, leading to the Interstate Commerce Commission issuing regulations that effectively ended segregation in interstate travel facilities. The bravery of the Freedom Riders and the widespread outrage generated by the violence against them marked a critical turning point in the struggle, in demonstrating the power of direct action to force federal enforcement of civil rights. Following the impactful Freedom Rides, the civil rights movement faced new challenges, and a particularly instructive one emerged in Albany, Georgia, from late 1961 into 1962. This campaign, known as the Albany Movement, marked a significant moment for Martin Luther King Jr. and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, offering a difficult but valuable lesson in strategy. The Albany movement began with local efforts to desegregate public facilities and secure voting rights. When King and the SCLC were invited to join in December 1961, hopes were high for a decisive victory. However, they soon encountered a formidable and unexpected adversary in Laurie Pritchett, Albany's police chief. Unlike the overtly violent law enforcement officials encountered in other southern cities, Pritchett adopted a shrewd and non-confrontational approach. He studied King's non-violent tactics and developed a counter-strategy designed to neutralize their effectiveness. Pritchett's plan involved avoiding public brutality and instead making mass arrests without incident. He arranged for protesters to be dispersed to jails across surrounding counties, preventing the local jail from becoming overcrowded. This tactic diffused the emotional impact of mass incarceration and denied the movement the dramatic visual confrontations that had galvanized national support in earlier campaigns. Despite thousands of arrests, including that of King himself, the Albany movement struggled to achieve its goals. There was no single and clearly defined target for desegregation, leading to a diffused effort. The lack of violent white resistance also meant that the national media, accustomed to dramatic clashes, lost interest. With no clear victory to claim, and the local power structure remaining largely intact, the Albany movement eventually faded without achieving significant lasting desegregation. For King and the SCLC, Albany was considered a tactical setback. It highlighted the need for more focused objectives and a better understanding of the psychology of local opposition. The lessons learned in Albany, particularly about the importance of choosing a specific, highly visible target and provoking a clear moral crisis, would profoundly influence the planning of future campaigns. The lessons from Albany were deeply absorbed by Martin Luther King Jr. and the SCLC. They understood that future campaigns required a sharper focus, a clearer target, and a strategy that could effectively expose the inherent injustices of segregation to a national audience. Their gaze soon turned toward Birmingham, Alabama, a city known for its unyielding resistance to racial equality. Birmingham in 1963 was, by many accounts, the most segregated city in the American South. Its racial divisions were stark and deeply entrenched, enforced by both law and pervasive custom. Black citizens faced systemic discrimination in employment, housing, and public accommodations. Acts of racial violence, including bombings targeting black churches and homes, were alarmingly common, earning the city the grim nickname Bommingham. The city's political landscape was dominated by staunch segregationists, and most notably Public Safety Commissioner Eugene Bull Connor, whose open hostility towards civil rights was well documented. For King and the SCLC, Birmingham presented a stark contrast to Albany. Here, the forces of segregation were not subtle or strategically evasive. They were overt, aggressive, and deeply committed to maintaining the racial status quo through any means necessary. This very extremism made Birmingham a compelling, albeit dangerous choice for a major nonviolent direct action campaign. The SCLC leadership believed that confronting such an entrenched and visible bastion of segregation would undeniably expose the moral bankruptcy of racial discrimination to the entire nation and the world. The strategic decision to confront Birmingham directly was a calculated risk. The potential for violence was immense. Yeah, but so too was the potential for a breakthrough. By targeting a city where segregation's brutality was so undeniable, King and his colleagues aimed to create a crisis that would force the federal government to intervene and propel the civil rights agenda forward. They sought to provoke a reaction that would be impossible for the nation to ignore, believing that the raw injustice on display would finally awaken the conscience of America. The stage was set for a pivotal confrontation, one that would test the very limits of nonviolent resistance in the heart of the segregated South. The Birmingham campaign, launched in April 1963, was internally codenamed Project C, signifying confrontation. This was a deliberate choice, reflecting the SCLC's intent to directly challenge the city's deeply entrenched system of segregation through a series of non-violent direct actions. The initial phase involved sit-ins at segregated lunch counters, kneel-ins at churches and protest marches, all designed to disrupt the city's commercial life and draw attention to racial injustices. Participants, including Martin Luther King Jr., were prepared for arrest and imprisonment, viewing these as essential components of the non-violent strategy. Mass arrests quickly followed, filling the city's jails. King himself was arrested on April 12, Good Friday, for violating an injunction against protesting. It was during this incarceration that he penned his influential Letter from Birmingham Jail, a profound defense of nonviolent civil disobedience addressed to white clergymen who had criticized his tactics. Despite the arrests, the movement initially struggled to gain the widespread participation needed to sustain its momentum. Many adult members of the black community, while supportive of the cause, were hesitant to risk their jobs and livelihoods by participating in demonstrations. Faced with dwindling numbers, a controversial but ultimately impactful decision was made to involve children and young students in the protests. This phase, beginning on May 2nd, became known as the Children's Crusade. Thousands of young people, some as young as 6, marched through the streets of Birmingham, singing freedom songs and carrying signs. Their involvement was met with a brutal response from Public Safety Commissioner Bull Connor. Fire hoses were turned on the young demonstrators, unleashing powerful streams of water that knocked children to the ground and pinned them against buildings. Police dogs were also deployed, attacking and biting some of the children. The stark images of these events, children being assaulted by water cannons and police dogs, were captured by photographers and broadcast across national and international media. These harrowing visuals profoundly shock the nation and the world, exposing the raw brutality of segregation in a way that words alone could not. The decision to involve children, though controversial at the time, proved to be a turning point. It ignited a surge of public sympathy and outrage, creating immense pressure for federal intervention and irrevocably altering the national conversation about civil rights. While incarcerated in Birmingham City Jail, confined to a small cell following his arrest during the early days of Project C, Martin Luther King Jr. received a public statement from 8 white Alabama clergymen. This statement criticized the timing and methods of the civil rights demonstrations, urging black citizens to withdraw support from the protests and engage in negotiations rather than direct action. King, lacking access to a typewriter, began to write his response on the margins of a newspaper, then on scraps of paper smuggled to him by his lawyers, eventually producing what would become one of the most significant documents of the civil rights movement. Letter from Birmingham Jail. In this eloquent and meticulously reasoned epistle, King articulated a powerful defense of non-violent direct action. He explained that such action was not a means to provoke violence, but rather a necessary strategy to create a crisis and foster a tension that would compel communities to confront issues that had long been ignored. He famously stated, "Non-violent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has consistently refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue." King meticulously distinguished between just and unjust laws, asserting that one has a moral responsibility to obey just laws, and conversely, a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. He argued that segregation laws were inherently unjust because they distorted the soul and damaged the personality, creating a false sense of superiority in one group and a false sense of inferiority in another. Beyond defending his tactics, the letter from Birmingham Jail served as a profound articulation of the moral urgency of the civil rights movement. King chastised not only the overt segregationists but also the white moderates who prioritized order over justice, whose passive acceptance of the status quo perpetuated racial inequality. He conveyed the deep frustration and weariness of a people who'd waited for centuries for their fundamental rights to be recognized. The letter underscored that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Its profound message resonated far beyond the jail walls, becoming a foundational text for the movement and a timeless testament to the power of moral conviction. As the Birmingham campaign intensified, particularly with the involvement of young students in what became known as the Children's Crusade, the response from city officials escalated dramatically. Eugene "Bull" Connor, Birmingham's Commissioner of Public Safety, was a staunch segregationist known for his unwavering commitment to maintaining racial separation and his willingness to use force to suppress any challenge to the established order. His methods were swift and unyielding. On May 2nd, 1963, thousands of children marched from the 16th Street Baptist Church towards downtown Birmingham. Connor's police force initially arrested them without excessive violence. However, on May 3rd, when even larger numbers of children gathered, Connor unleashed the full force of his department, and as television cameras and newspaper photographers were present, capturing every moment. What unfolded next shocked the nation and the world. Connor ordered his men to deploy high-pressure fire hoses, powerful enough to strip bark from trees, against the young, unarmed demonstrators. The streams of water knocked children off their feet, sent them tumbling down the street, and slammed them against buildings. Many were injured, some severely. Following this, Connor released police dogs, German shepherds, onto the protesters. Images of these dogs attacking and biting demonstrators, some of whom were teenagers, flashed across television screens and newspaper front pages. These vivid and disturbing scenes, broadcast into living rooms across America and around the globe, created an undeniable moral outrage. The stark contrast between the peaceful, undisciplined children, and the brutal, indiscriminate force of the police was undeniable. The visual evidence of state-sanctioned violence against innocent youth effectively stripped away any pretense of legitimacy from segregation. Public opinion, which had been divided or indifferent, began to shift decisively. The brutality in Birmingham became a turning point, exposing the true nature of segregation to a national audience, and galvanizing widespread support for the civil rights movement's objectives. It pressured the federal government to intervene more forcefully, recognizing that the crisis could no longer be ignored. The profound impact of the Birmingham campaign, particularly the televised brutality and the subsequent shift in public sentiment, created an imperative for action on a national scale. The momentum generated by these events propelled the civil rights movement towards a monumental demonstration of its collective strength and moral authority. This culminated in the historic March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, planned for August 28, 1963. The march was conceived as a powerful, non-violent appeal to the conscience of the nation and its lawmakers. Organizers, including A. Philip Randolph, Bayard Rustin, and the leaders of the major civil rights organizations, meticulously planned every detail to ensure a peaceful and impactful event. Their aim was to demand comprehensive civil rights legislation, an end to discrimination in employment, and a living wage for all workers. On that late summer day, an extraordinary assembly gathered in the nation's capital. From all corners of the country, an estimated 250,000 people converged on Washington, D.C. A diverse multitude of black and white citizens, men and women, young and old, all united by a common purpose. They arrived by bus, train and car, their collective journey a testament to their shared aspiration for equality and justice. The atmosphere was one of profound hope and quiet determination. Despite the immense numbers, the assembly remained remarkably peaceful and orderly. Participants carried signs advocating for civil rights, fair employment, and an end to segregation. They sang freedom songs, their voices echoing through the air, creating a powerful chorus of unity. The marchers gathered before the Lincoln Memorial, a symbolic backdrop, embodying the unfulfilled promise of emancipation. This massive and a disciplined demonstration served as a vivid tableau of a nation yearning for its ideals to be fully realized, setting the stage for the powerful words that would soon follow. As the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom reached its crescendo, the final speaker of the day stepped forward. Standing before the majestic Lincoln Memorial, with the reflecting pool stretching out behind him, Martin Luther King Jr. began to address the 250,000 people gathered, and through them, the entire nation. His delivery was initially measured, a thoughtful exposition on the unfulfilled promise of American democracy. He spoke of the promissory note issued to every American, a guarantee of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. A note that for black Americans had come back marked insufficient funds. King's words wove together constitutional ideals with theological principles, anchoring the struggle for civil rights in the deepest currents of American identity and universal justice. He articulated the urgent necessity of the moment, the danger of gradualism, and the unwavering commitment to nonviolence that defined the movement. His voice, clear and resonant, carried across the vast crowd, each phrase carefully chosen to convey both the profound grievance and the enduring hope. Then, in a moment of spontaneous brilliance, urged on by Mahalia Jackson's cry of "Tell them about the dream, Martin," King shifted from his prepared remarks. He began to speak of a dream, a vision of an America transformed. This dream was not merely for black Americans, but for the very soul of the nation. Like he envisioned a future where the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners could sit down together at the table of brotherhood. He spoke of a nation where individuals would be judged not by the colour of their skin, but by the content of their character. The I Have a Dream speech transcended a mere political address. It became a poetic articulation of an ideal, a moral compass for a divided nation. Its rhetorical power lay in its evocative imagery, its biblical allusions, and its universal appeal to justice and human dignity. The speech resonated deeply, becoming an enduring anthem for civil rights and human equality, its words etched into the collective consciousness of America and the world, forever defining a pivotal moment in the ongoing quest for justice. Just over 2 weeks after the uplifting crescendo of the March on Washington, a stark and brutal reminder of the deeply entrenched racial hatred in America shattered the fragile sense of progress. In Birmingham, Alabama, a city still reeling from the recent civil rights confrontations, Sunday, September 15th, 1963, began like any other day of worship. Young parishioners gathered at the 16th Street Baptist Church, a prominent symbol of the black community and a frequent meeting place for civil rights organisers. Beneath the church's stone steps, a powerful bomb, planted by white supremacists, detonated without warning. The explosion ripped through the building, tearing through walls and stained glass windows and sending debris raining down. Amidst the chaos and destruction, the horrific truth emerged. 4 young girls, Denise McNair, Cynthia Wesley, Carol Robertson, and Addie Mae Collins, who had been preparing for morning services in the church basement, were killed. Several others were injured. The bombing sent shockwaves across the nation and the world. It was an act of unspeakable cruelty, a direct and violent assault on innocent children, perpetrated in a sacred space. The stark contrast between the hopeful vision articulated by King on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and the grim reality of this terrorist act was profoundly jarring. The dream of racial harmony and justice so eloquently expressed collided with the persistent nightmare of racial violence and bigotry. This tragedy underscored the immense danger faced by black Americans, even as the movement gained national attention. It exposed the raw, unyielding resistance to change that simmered beneath the surface of Southern society. The deaths of the 4 girls became a powerful symbol of the sacrifices made in the struggle for civil rights, galvanizing further outrage and strengthening the resolve of many to push for meaningful legislation, even in the face of such profound sorrow and senseless loss. The event served as a grim testament to the long and arduous path still ahead. The profound moral outrage sparked by the Birmingham campaign, intensified by the tragic bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church, and amplified by the powerful call for justice at the March on Washington, created an undeniable momentum for federal action. President John F. Kennedy had introduced civil rights legislation in June 1963, but its passage faced significant opposition in Congress. And following Kennedy's assassination in November 1963, his successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, made the bill a priority, leveraging his political acumen and the nation's grief to push for its enactment as a tribute to the fallen president. After months of intense debate, filibusters, and strategic parliamentary maneuvers in both the House and the Senate, the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1964 was finally signed into law by President Johnson on July 2, 1964. This comprehensive piece of legislation represented a monumental triumph for the civil rights movement, marking a significant step toward dismantling the legal framework of segregation and discrimination that had plagued the nation for so long. The Act's provisions were far-reaching and transformative. It outlawed discrimination based on race, colour, religion, sex, or national origin in public accommodations, including hotels, restaurants, and theatres. It prohibited discrimination in employment practices, creating the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to enforce these new protections. Furthermore, it authorized the Attorney General to institute lawsuits to desegregate public facilities and schools, and it barred discrimination in federally assisted programs. While it did not directly address voting rights, which remained a significant barrier, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 fundamentally altered the legal landscape, providing federal enforcement power to combat systemic injustice and laying the groundwork for a more equitable society. This legislative victory was a testament to years of tireless activism, non-violent protest, and the moral conviction of countless individuals. In the midst of the intense struggle for civil rights within the United States, and shortly after the passage of the monumental Civil Rights Act, an extraordinary recognition came from across the Atlantic. In October 1964, the Norwegian Nobel Committee announced that Martin Luther King Jr. had been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. At just 35 years old, he became the youngest recipient of the prestigious award at that time. This international accolade was a profound acknowledgement of King's unwavering commitment to non-violent resistance as a means to achieve social change. The committee cited his leadership in the non-violent movement for civil rights, emphasizing his dedication to human dignity and racial equality. The Nobel Peace Prize served as a powerful validation of the philosophy of satyagraha, truth force, that King had so diligently applied and taught throughout the American South. The award brought King's message and the plight of African Americans to a global stage, shining a spotlight on the injustices still prevalent in the United States, even as it celebrated the progress being made. It provided immense moral support to the movement, demonstrating that the struggle for equality was not merely an internal American issue but a universal human rights concern. For King himself, the prize was both an honor and a heavy responsibility. He accepted it not as a personal triumph, but as a recognition of the entire movement and its countless participants. In his acceptance speech in Oslo, King articulated his belief that nonviolence was not a passive approach, but a potent force for justice, capable of transforming societies. He spoke of the creative battle to end the long night of racial injustice and reiterated his faith in humanity's capacity for good. The Nobel Peace Prize cemented King's status as a global figure, an international symbol of peaceful protest and an enduring voice for justice and human dignity, inspiring movements for freedom and equality far beyond America's borders. Despite the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the international recognition of the Nobel Peace Prize, significant barriers to full equality remained, particularly in the realm of voting rights. In many southern states, African Americans continued to face systematic disenfranchisement through poll taxes, literacy tests, and intimidation. To address this persistent injustice, the movement turned its attention to Selma, Alabama, in early 1965. Selma was chosen strategically due to its deeply entrenched resistance to black voter registration. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, joined local activists in a campaign to demand federal voting rights legislation. The plan was to organize a series of marches from Selma to the state capitol in Montgomery, a distance of approximately 54 miles, to draw national attention to the issue. The first attempt to march, on March 7, 1965, became known as Bloody Sunday. As approximately 600 peaceful marchers led by John Lewis and Hosea Williams crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge, they were met by Alabama state troopers and local law enforcement officers. Without provocation, the marchers were brutally attacked with billy clubs and tear gas, a horrific scene that was captured by television cameras and broadcast across the nation. Images of peaceful protesters, including women and children, being beaten and trampled, shocked the conscience of America. The violence at Selma, particularly Bloody Sunday, served as a pivotal turning point. The brutality inflicted upon the marchers galvanized unprecedented national outrage and support for voting rights. President Lyndon B. Johnson, deeply moved by the events and the moral imperative, addressed a joint session of Congress, urging the swift passage of a comprehensive voting rights bill. He famously adopted the movement's anthem, declaring, "We shall overcome." A second march, led by King, was turned back at the bridge days later to avoid further confrontation, but a federal court order eventually allowed the full Selma to Montgomery march to proceed later that month, under federal protection. The events in Selma, culminating in the successful march, created the political will necessary for the passage of the Voting Rights Act. The raw emotion and moral outrage ignited by the events in Selma, especially the televised brutality of Bloody Sunday, created an undeniable imperative for legislative action. Within days of the violence, President Lyndon B. Johnson, leveraging the national sentiment and his own formidable political skills, presented a voting rights bill to Congress. He framed the issue not merely as a civil rights concern but as a fundamental American principle. On August 6, 1965, the Voting Rights Act was signed into law, marking one of the most significant legislative achievements of the civil rights movement. This act went far beyond previous measures, directly attacking the mechanisms used to disenfranchise African American citizens. It outlawed literacy tests, poll taxes, and other discriminatory voting qualifications that had systematically denied Black Americans the right to vote for generations. Crucially, the Act also contained provisions for federal oversight of voter registration in areas with historical patterns of discrimination. This included the authority for federal examiners to register voters in states where fewer than 50% of the non-white population had been registered to vote, or where less than 50% had voted in the previous presidential election. Furthermore, it required certain jurisdictions to obtain pre-clearance from the Department of Justice or the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia before implementing any changes to their voting laws. This measure aimed to prevent new discriminatory practices from emerging. The impact of the Voting Rights Act was swift and profound. Within a few years, voter registration among African Americans in the South surged dramatically. Millions who had been excluded from the democratic process for decades were now able to cast their ballots, leading to a significant increase in Black political participation. This empowerment at the ballot box began to transform the political landscape of the South, ushering in a new era where Black voices could finally be heard and represented in local, state, and national government. The Act stood as a testament to the enduring power of nonviolent protest and legislative will in the pursuit of fundamental American liberties. With the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, much of the legal framework of Jim Crow segregation in the South had been dismantled. Yet, Martin Luther King Jr.'s perceptive gaze began to turn toward a different, more complex set of challenges that persisted across the nation, particularly in the urban centers of the North. He recognized that while legal segregation had been a clear and tangible enemy, the issues confronting African Americans in cities like Chicago, Detroit, and Los Angeles were often more insidious and deeply entrenched. King started to articulate that the fight for true equality extended beyond the absence of discriminatory laws. It encompassed the presence of genuine opportunity, economic justice, and an end to the systemic disadvantages that trapped millions in cycles of poverty. He observed that in northern cities, segregation was often not mandated by law, but existed de facto, by fact rather than by law, through housing patterns, discriminatory lending practices, and unequal access to education and employment. These realities created what he termed slums of the mind and ghettos of the soul, environments where hope withered and potential was stifled. His evolving perspective led him to understand that the movement's focus needed to broaden considerably. The struggle for civil rights, he realized, was inextricably linked to the struggle for human rights, encompassing issues of economic exploitation, inadequate housing, and pervasive unemployment. He began to speak more frequently about the need for a revolution of values in American society, one that would prioritize human dignity and economic equity over materialism and militarism. This shift marked a new phase in King's leadership, moving from the clear-cut battles against legal segregation in the South to the far more diffuse and challenging fight against systemic injustice and economic inequality across the entire nation. It required a re-evaluation of tactics and a deeper engagement with the root causes of poverty and disadvantage, moving the movement into unfamiliar and often more resistant terrain. In pursuit of his broadened vision, Martin Luther King Jr. and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference turned their attention to Chicago in 1966, embarking on what became known as the Chicago Freedom Movement. This campaign aimed to confront the pervasive issues of housing discrimination, inadequate education, and widespread poverty that afflicted African American communities in the urban North. King moved his family into a dilapidated apartment in the West Side ghetto of Lawndale, seeking to immerse himself fully in the daily realities faced by the city's black residents. The challenges encountered in Chicago differed significantly from those in the South. In the South, the enemy was often explicit and legally sanctioned segregation, enforced by clear laws and visible acts of brutality, which could be met with moral outrage and direct nonviolent confrontation. In Chicago, however, the discrimination was less overt, more deeply woven into the fabric of social and economic systems. There were no whites-only signs, but rather subtle covenants, banking practices, and real estate agents who maintained segregated neighborhoods through informal yet powerful means. The campaign sought to highlight these hidden injustices, organizing marches into predominantly white neighborhoods to protest discriminatory housing practices. These demonstrations often met with intense hostility, not from state-sanctioned violence as in the South, but from angry white residents who hurled rocks, bottles, and racial slurs. The visceral hatred displayed on the streets of Chicago was a stark reminder that racial prejudice was not confined to one region of the country, but manifested differently in various contexts. King found that the political landscape in Chicago was also distinct. Mayor Richard J. Daley, a powerful figure, was adept at managing dissent and offered concessions that often proved superficial, making it difficult to achieve the clear moral victories that had characterized earlier campaigns. The issues were complex, intertwined with economic structures and the ingrained prejudices of a diverse population, making the path to fundamental change far less straightforward than battles against specific segregation laws. The Chicago campaign therefore illuminated the formidable and often intangible barriers to equality that existed beyond the Mason-Dixon line. The resistance encountered during the Chicago campaign presented a stark contrast to the confrontations King had faced in the Deep South. While Southern demonstrations often met with police dogs, fire hoses, and state-sanctioned violence, the hostility in Chicago frequently came from angry white mobs. As SCLC activists, including King, led marches through neighborhoods like Gage Park and Marquette Park, demanding open housing, they were met not by law enforcement acting as an oppressive force, but by enraged residents. These crowds, often numbering in the thousands, hurled rocks, bottles, and racial epithets at the peaceful demonstrators. King himself was struck by a rock during one such march in Marquette Park, an experience he later described as more terrifying than anything he had encountered in the South. Noting the intensity of the hatred in the eyes of those who opposed them, the raw, visceral anger of ordinary citizens defending their segregated neighborhoods highlighted the deeply ingrained nature of racial prejudice in the North. beyond the streets, years political maneuvering added another layer of complexity. Chicago's Mayor Richard J. Daley, a powerful Democratic boss, skillfully worked to contain the movement without resorting to the overt brutality that had backfired so spectacularly in places like Birmingham or Selma. Daley engaged in negotiations, making promises of reform that often proved to be more symbolic than substantive. He presented a facade of cooperation while largely preserving the existing power structures. This blend of grassroots white backlash and shrewd political deflection made it exceedingly difficult for the Chicago freedom movement to achieve the clear, legislative victories that had marked the Southern campaigns. While an agreement was eventually reached, promising improvements in housing and fair employment, the practical implementation of these pledges remained largely elusive. The experience in Chicago underscored the profound differences in confronting de facto segregation and economic injustice compared to the battles against de jure segregation, revealing a more entrenched and less tractable form of resistance. As the civil rights movement progressed, and particularly after the legislative successes of 1964 and 1965, a growing sense of disillusionment began to emerge within certain segments of the black community. Despite the dismantling of legal segregation, the everyday realities of poverty, discrimination, and police brutality persisted, especially in northern urban centers. This simmering frustration gave rise to a new ideology, Black Power. The term Black Power gained significant traction in 1966, and famously popularized by Stokely Carmichael, then chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC. Carmichael's call for Black Power during a march in Mississippi signaled a distinct shift in focus and strategy. While King's philosophy emphasized integration, non-violence, and appealing to the moral conscience of the nation, Black Power advocated for racial pride, self-determination, and the creation of independent black institutions. Leaders like Carmichael argued that African Americans needed to build their own political and economic power, rather than relying on appeals to a white-dominated society. There was an increasing impatience with the slow pace of change and a questioning of whether non-violent direct action alone could address the deeper, systemic issues of racial inequality. For proponents of Black Power, the goal was not merely integration into existing structures, but a fundamental restructuring of power dynamics. This ideological divergence created a significant challenge for King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. While King understood the roots of the frustration that fueled Black Power, he firmly believed in the principles of nonviolence and integration as the most effective path to lasting change. He worried that the rhetoric of Black Power, particularly its more militant interpretations, could alienate potential white allies and provoke a backlash that would undermine the gains already achieved. The rise of Black Power represented a growing internal tension within the broader struggle for civil rights, reflecting a profound debate about the means and ends of liberation. Martin Luther King Jr. His response to the rise of Black Power was complex and deeply considered, reflecting his unwavering commitment to his core principles, while also acknowledging the profound frustrations that fueled the new movement. He found himself in a challenging position, needing to articulate his disagreement with certain aspects of Black Power without alienating the younger generation of activists who felt increasingly marginalized by the established civil rights leadership. King recognized the psychological validity of the Black Power slogan, understanding it as a cry for dignity, self-respect, and a legitimate desire for African Americans to control their own destiny. He often spoke of the need for Black people to develop a healthy sense of identity and to overcome internalized oppression. In this sense, he shared common ground with the movement's emphasis on racial pride. However, King fundamentally diverged from Black Power's more separatist tendencies and any implied endorsement of violence. He believed that true liberation could not be achieved through isolation or through the use of force, which he saw as both morally wrong and strategically self-defeating. For King, the interconnectedness of humanity meant that genuine freedom for Black Americans required the transformation of the entire society, not merely a retreat from it. He maintained that nonviolence remained the most potent weapon against systemic injustice, capable of achieving both practical gains and moral victories by appealing to the conscience of the nation. He often warned that Black power, if interpreted as Black supremacy or as an embrace of violence, risked alienating the necessary white allies and could lead to a cycle of destructive retaliation. King continued to advocate for an integration of power where Black Americans would participate fully and equally in all aspects of American life, wielding their influence not through separation, but through equitable inclusion. His articulation of this position was an attempt to bridge the growing divide, acknowledging the pain while steadfastly holding to his vision of a beloved community achieved through peaceful means. As the 1960s progressed, the escalating conflict in Vietnam weighed heavily on Martin Luther King Jr.'s conscience. For years he had privately expressed concerns about the war, but in 1967 he made the momentous and controversial decision to speak out forcefully and publicly against it. This move represented a significant expansion of his activism beyond the realm of domestic civil rights, linking the struggle for racial justice at home with issues of international peace and economic injustice. On April 4, 1967, exactly 1 year before his death, King delivered his seminal Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence speech at Riverside Church in New York City. In this powerful address, he articulated a comprehensive critique of American foreign policy, declaring that the war was a moral catastrophe that diverted crucial resources from poverty programs in the United States and disproportionately affected poor Americans and people of color who were sent to fight. He described the U.S. as the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, a stark condemnation that resonated far beyond the immediate context of the conflict. King's decision to condemn the war so unequivocally drew immediate and intense criticism from many quarters. Former allies in the civil rights movement, who feared that his anti-war stance would jeopardize the gains made in racial equality by alienating President Lyndon B. Johnson and the Democratic Party, voiced their disapproval. Prominent newspapers, including the New York Times and the Washington Post, published editorials denouncing his speech, suggesting that he had overstepped his bounds as a civil rights leader and was venturing into areas where he lacked expertise. The media often portrayed him as unpatriotic or as a tool of communist sympathizers. Despite the widespread condemnation and the personal toll it took, King remained resolute. He believed that his commitment to nonviolence and justice extended to all humanity, and that he could not remain silent in the face of such immense suffering and moral decay. For him, the struggles against racism, poverty, and war were inextricably linked, forming a triple evil that demanded a unified moral response. This stance, while isolating him from some, solidified his image as a global advocate for human rights and peace. Martin Luther King Jr.'s opposition to the Vietnam War was not merely a political stance, but a deeply considered moral imperative rooted in his understanding of interconnected injustices. His reasoning was multifaceted, stemming from core principles that had guided his entire public life. Firstly, King saw the war as a catastrophic drain on national resources. He frequently spoke of the madness of Vietnam diverting funds and attention away from vital domestic programs designed to alleviate poverty and improve education within the United States. He observed that the very programs of President Johnson's Great Society, which aimed to uplift the poor, were being starved of necessary funding as the cost of the war escalated. This created a stark paradox. America was spending billions to fight a war abroad while neglecting its own citizens struggling with poverty and inequality at home. Secondly, King highlighted the disproportionate impact of the war on poor and minority soldiers. He noted that young black men, often lacking educational and economic opportunities, were being sent to fight and die in Vietnam in numbers far exceeding their proportion of the US population. He spoke of seeing young men from impoverished neighborhoods who had been denied full citizenship rights in their own country, being sent to guarantee liberties in Southeast Asia that they themselves did not fully possess. This injustice, he argued, created a cruel irony, forcing those who suffered most from societal inequities to bear the heaviest burden of war. Finally, King found the war morally irreconcilable with his unwavering message of peace and nonviolence. He believed that advocating for nonviolent solutions to domestic problems, while simultaneously supporting a violent military conflict abroad, was inherently hypocritical. His conscience compelled him to speak out, seeing the war as a profound moral failing that corrupted the nation's soul. For King, peace was not merely the absence of war, but the presence of justice, and the war in Vietnam represented a stark absence of both overseas and within American society. Beneath the public resolve and the powerful speeches, Martin Luther King Jr. carried an immense personal burden. The weight of his leadership, the constant pressure of the movement, and the relentless threats to his life and family exacted a profound emotional and psychological toll. These struggles often remained private, shared only with his closest confidants and family members. King lived under the shadow of perpetual danger. Bomb threats, death threats, and actual violence were a constant backdrop to his work. His home was bombed, he was stabbed, and the FBI pursued him with relentless surveillance and attempts to discredit him. This environment of sustained hostility meant that even moments of rest were tinged with anxiety, knowing that his life and the lives of those he loved were always at risk. The strain of these external pressures was immense, demanding a vigilance that few could sustain. Beyond the physical threats, King grappled with the profound weight of expectation. He was the voice, the symbol, the hope for millions, and this responsibility was both an inspiration and an exhausting burden. There were moments, often in the quiet of the night, when doubt would creep in. He questioned whether his strategies were truly effective, whether the sacrifices were leading to lasting change, and whether the vision of the beloved community could ever truly be realized in such a resistant world. These periods of introspection and self-doubt were intense, challenging his faith in humanity and his own capacity to lead. These private struggles occasionally manifested as periods of deep exhaustion and depression. The emotional labor of constantly confronting injustice, absorbing hatred, and maintaining a hopeful demeanor in the face of overwhelming odds was draining. His schedule was relentless, leaving little room for personal respite or restoration. While he presented a calm and resolute front to the world, those closest to him understood the profound weariness that often settled upon him, a testament to the extraordinary demands placed upon a man striving to move mountains. The personal struggles of Martin Luther King Jr. These were exacerbated by a relentless and pervasive campaign of surveillance and harassment orchestrated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Under the direction of J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI initiated a comprehensive effort to monitor King and, ultimately, to undermine his leadership and the broader civil rights movement. This activity began with investigations into alleged communist ties, a common tactic during the Cold War era to discredit prominent figures. As King's influence grew, particularly after the March on Washington, Hoover's personal animosity intensified. He viewed King as a dangerous demagogue and a potential threat to the established order. The FBI's surveillance expanded dramatically, involving extensive wiretaps on King's home and office telephones, as well as hidden microphones in his hotel rooms. The agency meticulously recorded his conversations, searching for any information that could be used to expose perceived moral failings or to link him to subversive activities. The gathered intelligence was then weaponized in a targeted campaign designed to discredit King publicly and privately. Hoover authorized the dissemination of derogatory information to government officials, journalists, and even to King's allies in an attempt to isolate him. Perhaps the most infamous act of harassment was the mailing of an anonymous letter, accompanied by a composite tape recording of King's private moments, directly to his home. This letter urged King to commit suicide, threatening to expose his private life if he did not withdraw from public life. And this systematic campaign of intimidation and character assassination placed immense additional strain on King. It aimed not only to diminish his credibility, but also to create an atmosphere of paranoia and distrust within the movement. The FBI's actions represented a profound abuse of power, demonstrating a willingness to use government resources to suppress a legitimate social movement and silence one of its most powerful voices, revealing a darker side of the institutional response to the push for civil rights. Emerging from the complex challenges of his later years, Martin Luther King Jr. conceived of his final major initiative, a bold and ambitious undertaking known as the Poor People's Campaign. This vision, which began to take shape in 1967, marked a significant evolution in King's strategic approach, expanding the scope of the movement beyond civil rights legislation to address fundamental economic injustices. He recognized that while legal barriers had begun to fall, deep-seated poverty continued to shackle millions of Americans, regardless of their racial background. King envisioned a campaign that would unite poor people from every corner of the nation and across all racial lines. The goal was to forge a powerful, multiracial coalition of Native Americans, Hispanic Americans, White Americans, and Black Americans, all bound by their shared experience of economic hardship. This diverse assembly would then converge on Washington, D.C. to demand concrete legislative action and a fundamental restructuring of economic policies. The campaign's core demands were clear and far-reaching: a guaranteed annual income, full employment, decent housing, and a significant increase in funding for education and job training programs. King believed that these measures were not merely social welfare programs, but essential components of true freedom and equality. He argued that poverty was a form of violence, systematically denying individuals their dignity and their right to a fulfilling life. His new vision sought to expose the systemic roots of poverty and to pressure the federal government to commit to its eradication. It was a call for a radical redistribution of wealth and opportunity, a direct challenge to the economic status quo. The Poor People's Campaign represented King's unwavering commitment to the marginalized, a testament to his belief that the struggle for civil rights was inextricably linked to the broader fight for economic justice. Now he saw it as the next logical step in the ongoing quest for a truly just and equitable society, a powerful demonstration of non-violent direct action aimed at the very heart of economic inequality. Central to the strategy of the Poor People's Campaign was the ambitious plan to construct a temporary settlement in the heart of the nation's capital. This encampment, envisioned as a living testament to the poverty King sought to overcome, was to be known as Resurrection City. The concept itself was designed to be a potent symbol, bringing the stark reality of destitution directly to the doorstep of power. The idea was to build a community of wooden shanties and tents on the National Mall near the Lincoln Memorial. For weeks, thousands of poor people from across the country, representing diverse ethnic and racial backgrounds, just would live together in this makeshift city. Their presence, visible and undeniable, would serve as a constant silent protest, a dramatic visualization of the plight of those often unseen and unheard. Resurrection City was not merely a place for lodging. It was intended as a functional, self-sufficient community, albeit temporary. Plans included a dining hall, medical facilities, a communications centre, and even a Soulforce university for education and training. The residents would engage in daily protests, lobbying efforts, and educational programs, all aimed at pressuring Congress and the administration for meaningful economic reforms. King and his organisers believed that this sustained, non-violent occupation would create an undeniable moral imperative for legislative action. Yeah, the daily existence of Resurrection City would dramatise the urgent need for a guaranteed income, affordable housing, and full employment. It was a direct continuation of King's philosophy of non-violent direct action, but on an unprecedented scale, transforming the very landscape of Washington, D.C. into a stage for economic justice. The city's construction and occupation were meant to be an immersive, inescapable reminder to the nation's leaders of their responsibility to address the endemic poverty that afflicted so many of its citizens. The very name, Resurrection City, carried a powerful message of hope and renewal, suggesting that from the ashes of poverty, a new and just society could emerge. As preparations for Resurrection City continued, a new and urgent call for assistance reached Martin Luther King Jr. from Memphis, Tennessee. In February of 1968, over 1,000 sanitation workers, predominantly African American, had gone on strike following the tragic deaths of two colleagues, Ecole Cole and Robert Walker, who were crushed by a malfunctioning garbage truck. The strike was not only about wages and working conditions, but also about basic human dignity and the right to organise a union, which the city government vehemently opposed. The workers, represented by AFSCME Local 1733, faced abysmal pay, no benefits, and dangerous working environments, often being sent home without pay on rainy days while white supervisors remained on the clock. Their demand for recognition of their union and fair treatment became a powerful symbol of economic injustice, resonating deeply with the themes of the Poor People's Campaign. And King viewed the Memphis strike as a critical manifestation of the very issues his campaign sought to address. It was a tangible struggle for economic justice, illustrating the plight of the working poor and the systemic inequities faced by African American labourers. He recognised that supporting the Memphis workers would not only aid their immediate cause, but also provide a real-world example of the broader fight for human rights and dignity that he was championing. In March 1968, King felt compelled to lend his voice and presence to the striking workers. He saw their struggle as inseparable from the larger movement for civil rights, emphasising that, what good does it do to have a fair housing bill if you don't have a job or money to buy a house? His commitment to Memphis became a significant diversion, though a purposeful one, and from the immediate focus on Washington, D.C., as he sought to apply the principles of nonviolent direct action to this specific yet universally resonant battle for economic and human dignity. On the evening of April 3rd, 1968, in Memphis, amidst a severe thunderstorm, Martin Luther King Jr. delivered what would become his final public address, known as the I've Been to the Mountaintop speech. The setting was Mason Temple, the headquarters of the Church of God in Christ, filled with sanitation workers and their supporters. King, who'd been feeling unwell, was initially hesitant to speak, but the fervent crowd drew him to the podium. His voice, weary yet resonant, filled the hall as he recounted the long journey of the civil rights movement, from ancient Egypt to the present moment. Yes, he spoke of the urgent need for unity among the sanitation workers and the importance of their non-violent struggle. King's words were a powerful call to action, urging the community to sustain their efforts for justice and to support the workers' cause through economic boycotts. However, a distinct and poignant thread of mortality wove through his message. King reflected on the threats against his life, acknowledging the dangers he faced daily. He spoke of having received a bomb threat upon his arrival in Memphis and calmly addressed the possibility of an early death. Yet, even in this sombre acknowledgement, his message remained one of profound hope and unwavering faith in the ultimate triumph of justice. He described a vision as if from a mountaintop of the promised land of equality and freedom. There he expressed confidence that his people would reach this destination, even if he himself might not be there with them physically. The speech concluded with an almost serene acceptance of his own fate, declaring, "I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we, as a people, will get to the promised land." This powerful declaration, delivered with such quiet certainty, left an indelible impression on those present, a chilling premonition cloaked in the language of hope. The day of April 4th, 1968 dawned in Memphis, Tennessee, with a sense of purpose for Martin Luther King Jr. and his close associates. Having delivered his powerful mountaintop speech the previous evening, King spent the day in meetings at the Lorraine Motel. He's strategizing for the upcoming march in support of the sanitation workers' strike. He discussed plans for non-violent demonstrations and the broader objectives of the Poor People's Campaign. As evening approached, King prepared for dinner at the home of a local minister. At approximately 6:01 p.m., he stepped out onto the second-floor balcony of the motel, engaging in conversation with his colleagues standing in the courtyard below. Among them were Ralph Abernathy, Jesse Jackson, and Andrew Young. They discussed the evening's plans and exchanged light-hearted remarks. In that moment, a single shot rang out. The bullet struck Martin Luther King Jr. in the neck and jaw, severing his spinal cord. He collapsed instantly onto the balcony. The sound of the gunshot shattered the evening calm, replaced by shouts of horror and disbelief from those nearby. Witnesses quickly pointed towards a nearby rooming house, where the shot was believed to have originated. Emergency services were called immediately. King was rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital, where doctors worked to save his life. However, the wound was catastrophic. Despite their efforts, Martin Luther King Jr. was pronounced dead at 7:05 p.m. The news of his assassination spread across the nation with devastating speed. A profound shock rippled through communities, both black and white. The man who had preached non-violence and love had been struck down by an act of extreme violence. The immediate aftermath was characterized by widespread grief, anger, and a sense of profound loss, igniting a wave of unrest in cities across the United States. The nation grappled with the brutal reality of what had occurred, the sudden and tragic end to a monumental life. The news of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination on April 4th, 1968, ignited an immediate and profound reaction across the United States and around the world. Disbelief gave way to a deep national mourning, intertwined with expressions of outrage and despair. President Lyndon B. Johnson, upon hearing the tragic news, called for a national day of mourning, and flags were ordered to fly at half-staff. Many public figures, both political and cultural, voiced their sorrow and condemnation of the act. Yet, alongside the solemn tributes, a palpable anger simmered, particularly within the African American community. The hopes and progress symbolized by King's non-violent leadership seemed to have been violently extinguished. This anger, fueled by years of systemic injustice and the sudden loss of their most prominent advocate, erupted into widespread unrest. Within hours of his death, riots began to break out in major cities across the country. Washington, D.C., located just a few miles from the White House, saw some of the most intense disturbances. Fires burned, Businesses were looted, and conflicts with law enforcement ensued. Similar scenes unfolded in Baltimore, Chicago, Kansas City, and more than 100 other urban centers. The National Guard was deployed in numerous cities to quell the disturbances, a stark and somber display of the nation's internal turmoil. These outbreaks of violence were a complex expression of grief, frustration, and the deep-seated grievances that King had tirelessly worked to address through peaceful means. The riots underscored the fragility of social peace and the immense challenges still facing the nation in its struggle for racial equality. Internationally, leaders and citizens alike expressed their condolences and shock, recognizing King's global stature as a champion of human rights. His death was mourned not just as an American tragedy, but as a loss for the cause of peace and justice worldwide. The immediate aftermath was a period of intense national introspection and sorrow, marked by a vivid demonstration of the unresolved tensions within American society. In the immediate wake of her husband's assassination, Coretta Scott King displayed extraordinary strength and an unwavering resolve. Amidst her profound personal grief and the nation's tumultuous reaction, she refused to allow the movement to falter. With quiet dignity, she emerged as a powerful symbol of continuity and determination. Just days after Martin Luther King Jr.'s death, Coretta Scott King made the courageous decision to travel to Memphis, Tennessee. There, she led a silent march through the city streets, fulfilling her husband's original purpose, to support the striking sanitation workers. Her presence was a poignant and powerful statement, demonstrating that the fight for justice, even in the face of such immense tragedy, would persist. She addressed the workers, emphasizing the importance of nonviolence and reaffirming the moral righteousness of their struggle. Beyond Memphis, Coretta Scott King took on the crucial responsibility of leading the Poor People's Campaign. This ambitious initiative, conceived by her husband, aimed to bring together a diverse coalition of impoverished Americans to demand economic justice from the federal government. Despite the devastating loss of its principal architect, Coretta Scott King stepped into the leadership role, ensuring that the campaign's momentum was not entirely lost. She travelled extensively, speaking to various groups, rallying support and articulating the campaign's goals. Her voice, though often gentle, carried immense authority and moral clarity. She became a living embodiment of her husband's vision, carrying forward the torch of non-violent social change. Her actions in those difficult weeks and months were pivotal in maintaining the morale of the movement and in reminding the nation of the enduring principles for which Martin Luther King Jr. had sacrificed his life. Through her resilience, Coretta Scott King ensured that the dream, though shaken, would not be abandoned. The search for Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassin commenced immediately after the tragic event in Memphis. Within days, authorities identified a suspect, James Earl Ray, a known fugitive who had escaped from a Missouri state prison the previous year. An intense international manhunt ensued, drawing considerable attention from law enforcement agencies across the globe. Ray's flight from justice concluded 2 months later, in June 1968, when he was apprehended at London's Heathrow Airport. He was attempting to leave the United Kingdom on a false Canadian passport, bound for Brussels, Belgium. After extradition proceedings, he was returned to the United States to face charges for the murder of Martin Luther King Jr. In March 1969, James Earl Ray pleaded guilty to the assassination. This plea, however, was entered under complex circumstances, and Ray almost immediately recanted his confession, asserting his innocence and claiming he had been coerced. Despite his later denials, he was sentenced to 99 years in prison. He spent the remainder of his life incarcerated, attempting to withdraw his guilty plea and requesting a trial. The conviction of James Earl Ray did not, however, bring a complete sense of closure for many. From the very beginning, and continuing for decades, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. has been a subject of enduring controversy and numerous conspiracy theories. These theories suggest that Ray was either a patsy or part of a larger, more elaborate plot involving government agencies or other powerful groups. Various investigations, including those by the US House Select Committee on Assassinations in the late 1970s, examined these claims. While the committee concluded that Ray acted alone in the actual shooting, it also found that there was a likelihood of conspiracy, though it could not identify the conspirators. The King family itself later expressed belief in Ray's innocence and the existence of a broader conspiracy. These differing perspectives and unresolved questions have ensured that the circumstances surrounding Martin Luther King Jr.'s death remain a topic of discussion and scrutiny, casting a long shadow over the official narrative. In the immediate aftermath of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, amidst the profound grief and the widespread unrest that gripped the nation, a significant legislative response emerged. Just days after his death, a crucial piece of civil rights legislation, which had been stalled in Congress for an extended period, gained renewed and powerful momentum. This was the Fair Housing Act, also known as the Civil Rights Act of 1968. This act aimed to address the persistent issue of discrimination in housing, an area King had increasingly focused on in his later years, particularly during the Chicago Freedom Movement. It outlawed discrimination concerning the sale, rental, and financing of housing based on race, religion, national origin, and sex. For many years, discriminatory practices such as redlining, restrictive covenants, and outright refusal to sell or rent to minority groups had perpetuated segregation and limited opportunities, creating deeply entrenched patterns of inequality in American cities and suburbs. President Lyndon B. Johnson, who had worked closely with King on previous civil rights legislation, played a pivotal role in pushing the bill through. He recognized the urgent need for action in the wake of the national tragedy. On April 11, 1968, precisely 1 week after King's assassination, President Johnson signed the Fair Housing Act into law. In his remarks, he explicitly linked the passage of the bill to King's legacy and the ongoing struggle for equality, acknowledging that the legislation was a fitting, if sombre, tribute to the fallen leader. The passage of the Fair Housing Act was a direct and undeniable response to King's death. It served as a testament to his enduring influence, even in his absence, and underscored the moral imperative that his life and work had instilled in the national consciousness. While it could not heal the wounds of his loss or quell all the anger, it represented a tangible step forward in the pursuit of the comprehensive justice he had tirelessly advocated for. It demonstrated that even in profound sorrow, progress could still be achieved, carrying forward the momentum of the movement he had so powerfully led. With the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., the civil rights movement found itself at a profound crossroads. For years, King had been its most visible and articulate spokesperson, its strategic mind, and its moral compass. His absence created a void that no single individual could entirely fill, prompting the movement to adapt and redefine itself in the years that followed. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SCLC, which King had co-founded and led, he struggled to maintain its central role. Ralph Abernathy, King's trusted confidant, assumed leadership, but the organization faced challenges in replicating the broad appeal and fundraising success it had enjoyed under King. Its focus shifted somewhat, continuing the Poor People's Campaign, which King had envisioned, but with diminished impact compared to earlier initiatives. Beyond the SCLC, the movement diversified. Other organizations and leaders, who had sometimes disagreed with King's nonviolent approach or his later focus on economic issues, continued their work with renewed urgency. Groups advocating for black power, for instance, gained further traction, arguing for self-determination and the empowerment of black communities through various means. This often meant a departure from the strict tenets of nonviolence that King had championed, reflecting the growing frustration and militancy among some segments of the black population. The focus of activism also broadened. While the legislative victories of the mid-1960s had dismantled de jure segregation, systemic issues of economic inequality, housing discrimination, and educational disparities persisted. Activists increasingly turned their attention to these structural injustices, often working at local levels to effect change in communities. The struggle became less about grand marches and more about sustained, often painstaking, efforts in specific areas of policy and social reform. The movement also had to contend with a changing political landscape. The initial national consensus that had facilitated the passage of landmark civil rights legislation began to fray. The Vietnam War continued to consume national attention and resources, and a conservative backlash against social change started to emerge. Despite these formidable challenges, the spirit of the movement, ignited by King and countless others, continued to manifest in various forms, pushing for a more just and equitable society. Despite the challenges and shifts in the civil rights movement following King's death, the core philosophy he championed, that of nonviolent resistance, retained a profound and enduring power. This approach was not merely a tactic, but a deeply held conviction, rooted in spiritual principles and a belief in the inherent dignity of all humanity. Its effectiveness, demonstrated so powerfully during the American Civil Rights Movement, continued to resonate across the globe. King's articulation of nonviolence as a potent force for social change drew heavily from Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy of satyagraha. It emphasized moral persuasion, direct action without aggression, and a willingness to suffer rather than inflict suffering. This strategy aimed to expose injustice, appeal to the conscience of the oppressor, and ultimately create a beloved community where all could thrive. The iconic images of peaceful protesters facing brutal violence, yet refusing to retaliate, galvanized public opinion and created a moral imperative for legislative change. In the decades following King's passing, whilst movements for liberation and human rights in various parts of the world continued to draw inspiration from his example and teachings. From the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa, led by figures like Nelson Mandela, who explicitly acknowledged King's influence, to democratic movements in Eastern Europe, and later protests for social justice in countless nations, the principles of non-violent civil disobedience were adapted and applied. The enduring power of non-violence lies in its capacity to disarm aggression, to elevate the moral high ground, and to build broad coalitions by appealing to universal values. It provides a means for the marginalized to confront powerful systems without resorting to violence, which often alienates potential allies and perpetuates cycles of conflict. Even in contemporary struggles for climate justice, economic equality and civil liberties, activists frequently invoke King's legacy, finding in his methods a blueprint for confronting injustice and fostering peaceful transformation. His vision of non-violence remains a potent, if often challenging, pathway toward a more just and compassionate world. While Martin Luther King Jr. is most widely recognized for his pivotal role in the struggle for racial equality in America, his vision extended far beyond the confines of race. From his earliest days, influenced by theological studies and philosophical inquiry, King conceived of justice not as a segmented issue, but as an indivisible whole. He understood that true liberation for African Americans could not be achieved in isolation from broader struggles for human dignity and economic fairness for all people. This expansive perspective became increasingly evident in the later years of his life. After the landmark legislative victories of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, King began to articulate more forcefully the interconnectedness of racial injustice, poverty, and militarism. He recognized that de jure segregation was only one facet of oppression. The systemic economic disparities that trapped millions in poverty, regardless of their race, represented another equally insidious form of injustice. His shift to the Poor People's Campaign vividly illustrated this commitment, seeking to unite a multiracial coalition of the impoverished to demand economic rights from the federal government. Furthermore, King's outspoken condemnation of the Vietnam War underscored his conviction that injustice anywhere was a threat to justice everywhere. He saw the war not only as a moral abomination but also as a drain on resources that could otherwise be used to combat poverty at home, creating a tragic link between foreign policy and domestic suffering. This global outlook, his unwavering advocacy for human rights, and his persistent call for a beloved community grounded in peace and justice, transformed him from a leader of a specific movement into a universal symbol. His legacy thus transcends racial lines, inviting all to consider the deeper dimensions of equality, economic justice, and lasting peace. The profound impact of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life and work resonated deeply within American society, prompting a sustained effort to formally honor his contributions. The movement to establish a national holiday in his name began almost immediately after his assassination in 1968. Coretta Scott King, his widow, played a central role in advocating for this recognition, seeing it as a vital means to preserve his legacy and continue his fight for justice. For many years, the proposal faced considerable resistance in Congress, encountering debates over precedent, cost, and the appropriateness of honoring a private citizen with a federal holiday. Despite these challenges, a broad coalition of civil rights activists, labor unions, and concerned citizens tirelessly campaigned, gathering millions of petition signatures and organizing numerous rallies. Stevie Wonder's 1980 hit song Happy Birthday, dedicated to King, further galvanized public support and brought the cause into popular culture. By the early 1980s, the momentum for the holiday became undeniable. Finally, in November 1983, after decades of advocacy, President Ronald Reagan signed the bill into law, officially designating the third Monday of January as Martin Luther King Jr. Day. This act marked a historic moment, making King the first African American to be honored with a federal holiday. The first observance of Martin Luther King Jr. Day took place on January 20th, 1986. The establishment of this holiday serves as a permanent testament to King's indelible mark on the nation. It stands as a reminder of his unwavering commitment to nonviolence, his courageous leadership in the civil rights movement, and his enduring dream of equality and justice for all. It provides a day for reflection, and service and education, encouraging Americans to remember and recommit to the principles he so passionately championed. Beyond the annual observance of a federal holiday, numerous monuments, memorials, and institutions have been dedicated to preserving Martin Luther King Jr.'s memory and perpetuating his ideals. These physical spaces serve as tangible reminders of his contributions and provide places for public remembrance and reflection. Perhaps the most prominent of these is the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, situated in West Potomac Park in Washington, D.C., overlooking the tidal basin. Dedicated in 2011, this monument features a striking 30-foot stone sculpture of King, known as the Stone of Hope, emerging from two larger stones, the Mountain of Despair. The design is inspired by a line from his "I Have a Dream" speech. "Out of the mountain of despair, a stone of hope." Inscriptions of his powerful quotes are etched into a surrounding granite wall, inviting visitors to contemplate his philosophy and vision. The memorial's location, near the Lincoln Memorial where he delivered his iconic speech, symbolically links his struggle for civil rights with the broader narrative of American democracy. In Atlanta, Georgia, his birthplace and the heart of his early activism, the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historical Park preserves several key sites connected to his life. This includes his childhood home, Ebenezer Baptist Church, where he and his father served as pastors, and his final resting place at the King Center. The King Center, officially known as the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change, was established by Coretta Scott King in 1968. It functions as a living memorial dedicated to educating the world about King's philosophy and methods of nonviolent social change. It houses archives, conducts educational programs, and continues to advocate for human rights. Across the United States and indeed the world, countless other streets, schools, parks, and public buildings bear his name, ensuring that his legacy remains deeply embedded in the public consciousness, a constant presence in the landscape of collective memory. Beyond the physical monuments and dedicated institutions, the most enduring aspect of Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy resides in his profound body of work, his speeches, sermons, and writings. These carefully crafted words continue to be studied, quoted, and debated. He is serving as a wellspring of inspiration and a timeless call to moral reflection for new generations. His addresses, delivered with a unique blend of intellectual rigor and spiritual fervor, were not merely rhetorical performances, but deeply considered arguments for justice and human dignity. The "I Have a Dream" speech, delivered on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, remains perhaps the most widely recognized, its cadences and imagery resonating globally as a vision of a harmonious, equitable society. Yet, it is but one among many powerful pronouncements that shaped the civil rights movement and continue to challenge complacency. His sermons, often preached from the pulpit of Ebenezer Baptist Church, explored the theological underpinnings of his activism, connecting the struggle for civil rights to universal ethical principles. These messages transcended denominational boundaries, speaking to a common humanity and emphasizing the moral imperative for action against injustice. They reveal the spiritual depth that anchored his commitment to nonviolence and his unwavering faith in the possibility of redemption and change. His written works, particularly Letter from Birmingham Jail, stand as masterpieces of persuasive prose and ethical reasoning. In this widely studied text, penned from a jail cell, King meticulously articulates the moral justification for civil disobedience, responding to criticisms with clarity, patience, and unwavering conviction. He expounded on the interconnectedness of justice, arguing that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Other books, such as Stride Toward Freedom, Why We Can't Wait, and Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, offer comprehensive insights into his strategic thinking, his philosophical framework, and his evolving vision for America. These speeches, sermons, and writings are not merely historical documents. They are living texts that continue to provoke thought, inspire advocacy, and offer guidance for navigating the complex moral challenges of any era. Their continued study ensures that King's intellectual and spiritual contributions remain a vital force in the ongoing pursuit of justice and peace. The influence of Martin Luther King Jr. transcends the borders of the United States, positioning him as a global icon of justice, human rights, and the profound power of peaceful protest. His philosophy of nonviolent resistance, yes, deeply rooted in the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi and Christian theology, offered a universal methodology for challenging oppression and achieving societal change without resorting to violence. Leaders and movements across the world have drawn direct inspiration from King's principles and strategies. From the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa, where figures like Nelson Mandela acknowledged King's impact, to democratic movements in Eastern Europe and human rights campaigns in Asia, his example has provided a template for peaceful activism in the face of entrenched power. The image of King, speaking passionately for equality and freedom, has become synonymous with the universal aspiration for a more just world. His advocacy for the inherent dignity of all people, irrespective of race or economic status, resonated far beyond the specific context of American segregation. King's vision of a beloved community, a society founded on justice, goodwill, and brotherhood, offered a compelling alternative to systems of division and exploitation. This vision provided hope and direction to those facing various forms of discrimination and injustice in their own nations. The Nobel Peace Prize, awarded to King in 1964, formalized his status as a global peacemaker and a champion of human rights on the international stage. It underscored the universal applicability of his message and the recognition that the struggle for civil rights in America was part of a broader global quest for freedom and equality. His life and work demonstrated that moral courage and a steadfast commitment to nonviolence could indeed move mountains, inspiring countless individuals to seek justice in their own communities and countries, cementing his legacy as a beacon of hope for humanity. The enduring relevance of Martin Luther King Jr.'s work in contemporary society is undeniable, serving as a constant reminder that while significant progress has been achieved, the fundamental struggle for true equality and justice continues. His speeches, particularly the I Have a Dream address, are frequently invoked in public discourse, not merely as historical artifacts, but as living calls to action, illuminating ongoing disparities. King's profound insights into systemic racism, economic inequality, and the need for nonviolent protest remain acutely pertinent. Modern movements advocating for civil rights, racial equity, and social justice often consciously echo his methodologies and moral framework. The fight against police brutality, voter suppression, and discriminatory practices in housing and education reveals that many of the issues King confronted persist, albeit in sometimes altered forms. His emphasis on the interconnectedness of justice for all people continues to resonate strongly. King understood that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, a principle that speaks to global challenges such as human rights violations, poverty, and environmental injustice. His dream was not solely for Black Americans, but for a society where every individual could thrive, free from oppression and want. While legal segregation has been dismantled in America, the more subtle yet pervasive forms of systemic bias and de facto segregation demonstrate that the content of character ideal has not yet been fully realized. Income disparities, access to healthcare, and educational outcomes still frequently align with racial and socioeconomic lines, highlighting the unfinished work of King's economic justice campaigns. Thus, King's legacy is not a static historical event, but a dynamic, ongoing conversation. His principles of love, non-violence, and unwavering commitment to justice continue to inspire current generations to confront contemporary challenges, urging society to move ever closer to the inclusive and equitable world he envisioned. The dream persists, requiring continuous effort and vigilance to prevent its deferral. Despite the widespread reverence for Martin Luther King Jr., his profound legacy is sometimes subject to simplification or misinterpretation, occasionally obscuring the full scope of his radical vision for social change. Many aspects of his message are often distilled into easily digestible sound bites, particularly his call for individuals to be judged by the content of their character rather than the colour of their skin. While this sentiment is central, isolating it from his broader critiques can inadvertently diminish the comprehensive and challenging nature of his work. King's advocacy extended far beyond racial harmony. He was a vocal critic of what he termed the triple evils of racism, poverty, and militarism. His later years were increasingly dedicated to confronting systemic economic injustice, advocating for a guaranteed basic income, and challenging the capitalist structures that perpetuated inequality. This more radical economic critique, along with his strong opposition to the Vietnam War, is sometimes overlooked in popular retellings, which tend to focus predominantly on the earlier, more widely accepted phases of the civil rights movement. The complexity of King's non-violent philosophy is also sometimes reduced to a passive acceptance of injustice. In reality, his non-violence was a dynamic and confrontational force, designed to expose injustice and compel a moral response, often through direct action and civil disobedience that intentionally created tension. Understanding this active, strategic dimension is crucial to grasping the power and efficacy of his methods. Furthermore, the sanitization of King's image can sometimes present him as a universally beloved figure, overlooking the intense opposition, criticism, and surveillance he faced during his lifetime, even from within the black community. Acknowledging these challenges provides a more accurate and nuanced picture of the man and the movement. To fully appreciate King's enduring impact, it is essential to engage with the entirety of his thought, his deep theological grounding, his sophisticated political analysis, and his unwavering commitment to dismantling all forms of oppression. His vision was not merely about individual prejudice, but about transforming the very structures of society to achieve true justice and equality for all. As we reflect upon the complete life of Martin Luther King Jr., it becomes clear that his story is not merely a chronicle of past events, but rather an enduring call to action, resonating across time. His journey, from the quiet parsonage to the national stage, culminating in a tragic end, presents a profound narrative of struggle, resilience, and unwavering hope. Yet, to view his life as a finished chapter in history would be to overlook the very essence of his message. King himself understood that the arc of the moral universe, though it bends towards justice, does not do so without human effort. His work therefore remains unfinished, an ongoing project requiring continuous engagement from each generation. The systemic injustices he fought against, racism, poverty, and militarism, have evolved in their manifestations but continue to challenge the ideals of equality and human dignity. His legacy invites us to recognize our own capacity and responsibility to contribute to a more just world. It prompts introspection. Where do we see injustice in our communities, and how might we, in our own ways, apply the principles of nonviolent resistance and courageous advocacy? The pursuit of justice, as King demonstrated, is not a spectator sport. It demands active participation, whether through quiet conviction, thoughtful dialogue, or collective action. The dream he articulated, a vision of a beloved community where all individuals are valued and afforded equal opportunity, is not a distant utopia, but a guiding star for present-day endeavours. It reminds us that progress is often incremental, born from persistent effort and a refusal to succumb to despair. Each small act of courage, each voice raised against inequity, or each hand extended in solidarity, contributes to the ongoing realization of that dream. Thus, Martin Luther King Jr.'s life story serves as a profound inspiration, a quiet yet powerful reminder that the work of building a more equitable and compassionate world continues. It is a legacy that empowers us to look inward and outward, to find our own roles in the enduring quest for justice and peace, ensuring that his sacrifice and vision continue to illuminate the path forward. In surveying the breadth of Martin Luther King Jr.'s remarkable life, a consistent thread emerges, that of profound courage. From his unexpected rise to leadership during the Montgomery bus boycott to his final fateful trip to Memphis, his journey was perpetually marked by a willingness to confront immense personal risk for the sake of a greater good. This was not a reckless bravery, but a deeply considered resolve, born from an unshakable inner conviction. His convictions were rooted deeply in his faith and his understanding of human dignity. He believed, with every fibre of his being, in the inherent worth of every individual regardless of race or circumstance. This belief fueled his tireless advocacy for civil rights, guiding his strategic decisions and his public pronouncements. It was a conviction that allowed him to stand firm against the fierce tides of segregation, violence, and institutional resistance. Even when faced with hatred in its most virulent forms, bomb threats, physical assaults, relentless harassment, and the constant spectre of death, King responded with an unwavering commitment to love. This was not a passive or sentimental love, but an active, demanding force, which he saw as the ultimate weapon against injustice. He consistently called for understanding, for empathy, and for reconciliation, even with those who sought to oppress. This commitment to nonviolent love, even in the face of such profound animosity, stands as one of the most remarkable aspects of his character. His life was a testament to the power of a single individual, armed with moral clarity and unwavering purpose, to ignite transformative change. He did not shy away from the difficult conversations, nor did he falter in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Instead, he met each challenge with a quiet authority, a steady voice, and a deep-seated belief in the eventual triumph of justice. Martin Luther King Jr.'s life, therefore, stands as an enduring beacon of courage, conviction, and the revolutionary power of love in action. In the unfolding narrative of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life, we witness a profound illustration of how a singular voice, imbued with unwavering moral clarity, can resonate far beyond its immediate context. He was not merely a participant in the civil rights movement, he became its most prominent and articulate voice, providing not only leadership, but also a deeply resonant philosophical framework. His ability to articulate the injustices of his time and to propose a path toward a more equitable future transformed the collective aspirations of many into a unified, powerful movement. King's strategic actions, from the carefully planned boycotts and sit-ins to the monumental marches across Alabama, were deliberate and impactful. He understood the power of nonviolent direct action not just as a moral imperative, but as a highly effective tool for social change. By presenting a clear moral contrast between the peaceful protesters and the violent forces of segregation, he compelled the nation to confront its conscience. This strategic brilliance, combined with his eloquent speeches, galvanized support from diverse segments of society, pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible. His voice, though singular, became a conduit for the hopes and struggles of millions. It was a voice that spoke not only to the immediate need for racial equality in America, but also to universal principles of justice, freedom, and human dignity. This universal appeal allowed his message to transcend national borders, inspiring freedom movements and civil rights struggles across the globe. The impact of his words and deeds continues to reverberate, demonstrating how one individual, through exceptional moral fortitude and strategic vision, can indeed spark a transformation that reshapes a nation and leaves an indelible mark on the world's consciousness. His legacy reminds us of the enduring potential within each person to contribute to a more just and compassionate future. As we gently conclude our journey through the life of Martin Luther King Jr., we are left with a quiet but profound sense of the enduring power of his message. It is a message that transcends the specific historical moment in which he lived, offering timeless principles that continue to guide and inspire. His vision was not one of fleeting triumph, but of a deep and abiding transformation of the human spirit, a shift towards a more just and compassionate world. The quiet strength of King's philosophy lies in its invitation to each of us. He called for an active, persistent commitment to non-violence, not as a passive surrender, but as a dynamic force for change. He taught that true peace is not merely the absence of tension, but the presence of justice. These are not abstract ideals, but practical guidelines for navigating the complexities of our own lives and communities. In the stillness of this moment, we can reflect on how these principles might resonate within us. To carry forward King's legacy is to embrace the courage to speak for what is right, to extend empathy even in the face of division, and to seek understanding where there is discord. It is to recognize that every small act of kindness, every quiet stand for fairness, contributes to the larger tapestry of human progress. His dream, often spoken of in grand terms, also holds a gentle, personal dimension. It is a call to cultivate peace within ourselves, to foster justice in our immediate surroundings, and to practice non-violence in our interactions. As the echoes of his extraordinary life settle, we are encouraged to find our own ways to embody these timeless truths, allowing the quiet power of his message to illuminate our path forward, contributing to a world more aligned with his enduring vision. As our quiet journey through the extraordinary life of Martin Luther King Jr. gently draws to a close, a profound sense of the enduring resonance of his dream remains. It is a dream that continues to echo softly, a whisper of hope and possibility across the passage of time. His voice, once a powerful call to action, now settles into a calm reminder of the ideals he so steadfastly championed. We have traversed the landscapes of struggle and triumph, witnessed moments of profound courage, and felt the weight of immense historical change. Yet, what truly lingers is not the clamour of conflict, but the quiet strength of his unwavering conviction in the inherent dignity of all humanity. This conviction, rooted in love and non-violence, offers a timeless blueprint for a more just and peaceful existence. Allow the story of his life to settle within you, a tapestry woven with threads of resilience, faith, and an unyielding pursuit of equality. The echo of his dream invites a moment of contemplation, a space to reflect on the quiet power of individual action and the collective journey towards a more harmonious world. It is a gentle reminder that the pursuit of justice is an ongoing endeavour, sustained by the steadfast hearts of those who believe in its possibility. Thank you for your quiet attention throughout this historical narrative. May the peace and contemplation fostered by this story resonate with you, as the echo of a dream continues to inspire a hopeful dawn.